Exposing the New World Order, you're listening to the Hagmann and Hagmann Report on the Global Star Radio Network. Stand by. Doug and Joe will be back shortly. Putting truth into action, you're listening to the Hagmann and Hagmann Report, streaming live on the Global Star Radio Network. Please stand by. Doug and Joe will be back momentarily. Reporting on events as they unfold at the end of the age. You're listening to the Hagmann and Hagmann Report, streaming live from the Global Star Radio Network. Please stand by. Doug and Joe will be right back.
good evening, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this Tuesday, November 17th, 2015 edition of the Hagman and Hagman Report, broadcasting live here from Erie, Pennsylvania, heard on Global Star Radio Network, live on video on YouTube, and streaming also on BTR. Folks, we had a great show planned for you tonight. My father and I both are here in studio. It's been a long day, and we have with us tonight Mr. Tom Horn and Steve Quayle, a dynamic duo to say the least. We got so much we're going to get into tonight that I'm going to...
Yeah, a little bit of a change up tonight, having Joe bring us on initially, but tonight, folks, you know, one of the things that interests me the most is the state of the world, obviously, and we all should be very concerned about the state of the world, whether that is the current geopolitical situation or the other aspects, the more esoteric aspects. And one thing I've been doing over the last couple of weeks with the help of Steve Quayle and also Tom Horn, although Tom doesn't really know it, I've been, directly, I've been researching a lot of what he's got, his books and such. And what struck me as really important is, and I've talked to Steve about this, as it was in the days of Noah, so it shall be at the end of time, at the end of the days. Now, they're not talking just about the corruption, the immorality. No. This goes much deeper than that. I don't know of any two people on the face of this planet that brings Genesis 6 alive, that brings the story of creation in Genesis and how it relates to present day than our two guests, Mr. Steve Quayle and Mr. Tom Horn. But folks, before we get to the program, I would like to direct each one of you, without apologies, because this, to me, if this is a classroom, these are your textbooks. Go to HagmanandHagman.com or SteveQuayle.com and click on the special offer for Tom Horn. Tom Horn put together just a fantastic special. $39.95 or under $40. You get over $300 in free products. That includes DVDs, books, audio sets. It's right there. It's on the right-hand side of HagmanandHagman.com. I mean, folks, I'm going to order this, although I've got some of the products, but included in this, Inhuman and such. Okay, and on and on. And then Steve Quayle, a prolific author, has written another book, a dynamic book that's coming out as well. So without further ado, and I didn't mean to, Steve and Tom, I didn't mean to cut in on your time. Go to Skywatch TV, which is accessible off of HagmanandHagman.com. That's skywatchtv.com and SteveQuayle.com. And there pursue your informational experience. Steve, I want to turn it over to you. Thank you so much for appearing. And Tom, God bless you, my friend. Thank you so much. I know you're both busy, but go ahead, Steve. Take it away.
Well, first of all, it's a treat for me to have Tom on talking about probably the most important subject to the church, yet people will not understand why what we write about, talk about, and produce videos about is so critical at this time. When Jesus said, Doug and Joe and Tom, in Matthew 24:21 through 23, "For then there shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, there should be no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened." What we're talking about tonight is inhuman. We're talking about the attack on humanity, the attack on the human race, the attack on the descendants of Adam and Eve, and the total scientific annihilation of everything that God created in the Garden of Eden, were it possible. So tonight we're going to talk about the most, I think this, the most pressing subject, because not a day goes by that obviously we hear of wars, rumors of wars, but the church is too blind, and I'll say deaf, dumb, and self-centered, to even begin to understand why this is so critical. It was Tom Horn that brought our attention to the fact of who's looking for an alien savior to come. It was Tom Horn and Chris Putnam that basically told everybody, hey, you're going to see a shift in the Vatican, you're going to see sitting Pope resign, and you're going to see something else come into his place in office. But tonight we're going to talk about Inhuman, the first hour and a half, and for the record, Tom and I don't get together to discuss what we're doing. I say this in order, Doug, Joe, and to the audience to just show you that God has a way of giving a double witness to something he's got his hands on. Tom is old in the faith. When I say old, I don't mean like old, but we both have parallel background. Yeah, I'm sorry, kind of got myself into that one. But what we've done is we have enough, let's say, lessons in life to look at some of this stuff in perspective. So, Tom, I'm going to turn it immediately over to you. As we're talking about your new documentary, Inhuman, we'll get into transhumanism, we'll get into the whole wrap. But tell me, you've just released your documentary, Inhuman, and tell us what this is about and how you got started in the project. Because in my opinion, this is critical. My opinion, this is the fulfillment of Matthew 24:22 happening before our eyes, and people scratch their heads and just yawn or go into the critic's scornful seat, whatever. But go ahead and let us know what's up.
Well, thanks a lot, Steve and Doug and Joe, for having me on the program with you tonight. I always love coming on Hagmann and Hagmann. You guys, you cut through all of the baloney and get right where the rubber meets the road and talk about the issues that are so important to the world today. And it's always just a breath of fresh air. So thanks for having me on with you. I'm a little bit wore out, actually. As you know, Steve, I've been traveling almost nonstop, but it's a good kind of wore out. Sometimes we get wore out and tired, and we think about all the stuff we've been doing, and we're not quite sure we can see, the benefit of our labors. And then there's a good time, there's a good kind of wore out, and that's what this is, that I think we've probably produced the most important research in the history of our company. That is Raiders News Update, now today known as Skywatch TV and Defender Publishing, and now Defender Films. We've launched this brand new department within Defender Publishing called Defender Films, and this new movie, Inhuman, is the first full-length, full-on documentary film. It's 3 hours long. It's 2 discs. And people should know that I really wanted to make this film shorter. I didn't want it to be that long. I was afraid that people wouldn't want to watch it if it was 3 hours long. But at the end of the day, we had so much good, important, and even breaking content. This film deals with what's going on in DARPA, cutting-edge surprises, breakthroughs. We literally traveled the world and interviewed the world's leaders, everything from the transhumanist camp, the top transhumanist thinkers out there now agreed to be put on film, all the way over to members of the U.S. President's Council on Bioethics, Stanford University professors, geneticists, people that work in laboratories. And then in the middle, we got together who we think are some of the world's most critical prophecy thinkers, because we wanted to ask the question, Steve, that you and I have been asking for the last few years, and that is there something prophetic about the hybrid age, about this push towards human enhancement, about genetics and germline, genetic engineering, things that we can talk about tonight. And so it's the end of a 5-year process, actually, but it began almost 10 years ago. Of all things, one day I was working on an article. Somebody asked me today, they said, how in the world did you ever get started on this process? And I emailed them back, and I said it was really, kind of innocent. I was writing an article for one of the largest newspapers out of Oklahoma on the subject of Halloween, of all things. And this 10 years ago, I came across this term called transgenics. And I had never seen the term before, but I kind of put it together in my head, right? Trans, genes, somehow here we were talking about crossing over species barriers. And as a prophecy believer, and believing that we were nearing that moment in time when Jesus said, as it was in the days of Noah, and believing that in the days of Noah, species barriers were crossed over, which gave birth to the Nephilim, the giants, also which we can talk more about this evening. When I saw that term, red flags went up. And I started writing about transgenics. I started studying. I tried to figure out what it was all about. And I wrote some critical analysis talking about some of my concerns about transgenics. And lo and behold, and Steve, you might recall some of this, man, I started getting attacked by some of the leading transhumanists in the world, Dr. James Hughes at the World Transhumanist Association at that time. Today it's called the IEET. Max Moore, who had written his ode to Lucifer, him and James Hughes at some of the leading transhumanist conferences were using me as fodder and talking about how they're going to have to deal with nut jobs like Tom Horn. And then one of the writers, and actually at the university level, a university had written a grant application to the National Institute of Health to write some of the early guidelines that they had things about it, and all of a sudden these university-level professors that were writing for the NIH, they're over there on the IEET, the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies, saying we're going to have to deal with people like Tom Horn, and they're over there comparing me to the Unabomber, and so it's not that I ever asked to be the guy who would produce a unique documentary that brings kind of all of the world views together to talk about these issues. And in fact, I really do believe that I'm probably one of the least qualified guys on the earth to do it, because I don't have degrees in science. I'm not like Sharon Gilbert, who now works for my company full time. I'm not a molecular biologist, right? My degrees are in theology, and yet, I know you guys will know what I mean by this. God says that sometimes his strength is made perfect in weakness. And I think that the reason that he gave me this massive commission to produce this very groundbreaking documentary is because at no point could I ever rely on my own strength or unique knowledge in the field. And maybe also because of that, that's why I was able to get everybody from James Hughes to Natasha Vita Moore to Hugo de Garis of the Ardalect War out of China to sit down and be in a film in which they knew that we were also going to have prophecy scholars talking about, is this the fulfillment of Matthew 24:37? Are we now entering again into the days of Noah, because now, for the first time, we have re-entered a period in time in which humans are set to be altered in very powerful and in germline genetic ways, meaning that all life downline from this generation is set to be permanently changed. And this only ever happened once before. That was in the days of Noah, and of course it didn't end very well back then, did it?
Well, no, it didn't.
It didn't. And Tom, one of the fascinating aspects of this is, again, if I'm sitting in a church and my pastor is not able to even embrace the ideas of the days of Noah, the problem is we're right here again, are we not? Basically, the flack you get is pretty much from those who profess to know Jesus. I even got some emails tonight, this isn't important, why do you guys bother? Well, hello, except the days be short and there be no flesh left alive. It's all about the bloodline. It's all about the seed. It's the war of seeds. It's the war on literally the future of every man, woman, and child on the planet. So, let's just get into some of the really important aspects of your findings. And I'm praying tonight, and thank you, intercessors, for praying, that it will finally click. I think I sent you an email saying I'm really praying that God will turn the light switch on for people, because this is it. It doesn't matter if it's the food we eat, the genetically altered atmosphere we have to breathe in, the vaccinations, all the genetically modified organisms, and all of the its that they are, drawing chemical substances from. I mean, we are in the giant test tube of the end days. So maybe we should have a new, work together on another project called End Time Test Tube Babies. The bottom line is that we're talking about, in my opinion, this is what God has led Tom Horn to do. This is what he's led me to do. Neither one of us started out saying, gee, I think I'll talk about giants and transhumanism, and I think I'll talk about Catholic prophecy, and I think I'll talk about blah, 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 blah. The bottom line is that one thing leads to another, and it's God opening his time seals, and oh, by the way, those are also mentioned in the book of Revelation. So let's talk about the most important aspect of your findings, because you know me, I like to get to the bottom line and work backwards.
Right. And I will say this, Steve, and I'm glad you kind of brought the subject of the church up. I'm really, really hoping one of the biggest motivators for spending the last few years and so much money and so much time and effort to produce this documentary, Inhuman, is my hope that this will be used in churches, that churches will play it, churches will watch it, churches will get involved in the conversation, home Bible studies will get involved in the conversation. And why am I hoping that is the case? Because we have reached a turning point now. The hybrid age has begun. For those that are not paying attention, they could be blown away by some of what we will talk about tonight. But if the church does not get involved in the discussion, in the ethics, if you will, then we are going to leave it to those who have a pro-transhumanist worldview to define the language, the legalese, the law, the constitutional changes that are set to occur right now. And I think that we will have failed in a very, very powerful way. In the days of Noah, it wasn't just about the giants. It was about the fact that Noah was a preacher of righteousness. God called him to be a preacher of righteousness. And all the way up until the rains started and the floods came and wiped out all of degraded humanity, Noah was a preacher of righteousness. God today is calling for men and women to become preachers of righteousness. And in order for them to be able to speak to this generation, they have to understand the issues that are important to this generation. Look around. Look at your kids. If you go to church, look at them. They're holding handheld devices. They're already using speech to word and word to speech, voice to speech technology. They're already being integrated into the technological singularity. They're already hearing guys like Ray Kurzweil and all these people talking about how in the very near future, nanobots are going to be swimming around in our brains and are going to integrate us with a hive mind. But now they're also hearing about CRISPR-Cas9 technology, and they're hearing about gene drive technology. The parents probably aren't even aware. The pastors in churches, many of them, are not even aware, but their children are aware. And they're looking forward to these moments in which they're going to be enhanced, in which they're going to get to be part of the Ubermenschen, part of the supermen of tomorrow, to be able to run faster, to become X-Men. They're turned on by all this cool stuff, and it's the lie of the enemy. It's that old Mephistophelian bargain. If you eat of the fruit of the tree, you shall be as gods. And that's what they're hearing. That's what they're buying into. And if the church doesn't get involved in this conversation, we are set now to lose an entire generation to the new days of Noah. When I speak on this subject, I can't tell you the number of TV shows, radio shows. I start talking about bioenhanced humans with unique cognitive abilities that are right now in the design budget. They're on the drawing board of military strategists, social engineers. They have been for some time, but now the marriage and even the dependence on machine intelligence is such that we're told that if an EMP were to occur tomorrow, that 90-some% of Americans would be dead within 12 months. Why? Because we are so integrated into the electronic system. And now imagine... Take this to the next step. Imagine that DARPA's line items come to pass, and over the next decade, that integration moves inside of our brains, moves inside of our cells, and then the grid that goes down. it wouldn't be 90%. It would be near 100% of all humanity, except for maybe the Amish that live around me over here, that would be dead. The other thing that the church needs to realize is that this is already being called by industry experts the hybrid age. This is the hybrid age. Now, what do they mean by that? They mean that in the same way there was an industrial age, there was an agrarian age, there was an internet age that gave birth to the internet and communications online, that what we are now entering into is the hybrid age. And by that, what they mean is that the same thing we've been doing with genetically modified crops, the same thing that we've been doing with transgenic animals, the same thing that we've been doing with human-animal chimeras, wink, wink, at only the embryonic scale, we intend to do to humanity in general. The largest departments of the U.S. government in the last 60 days have been ordered to create the guidelines that are now going to be used for creating a blueprint for the enhancement of humans, beginning on the battlefield, and then it will extend into the rest of the popular culture. We do absolutely intend to hybridize man via genetic alteration, nanotechnology, synthetic biology, human tech integration. People that watch this documentary, Inhuman, at first are going to be blown away. And let me warn you, this is kind of like a mini college course compacted into a 3-hour period of time in which you are hearing the experts, people that give congressional testimony, people that give advisory information to DARPA, to the U.S. Pentagon, that help in even writing those budgets that have been approved by Obama for creating a new blueprint for the human genetic code. You're going to hear these people, and what's going to blow you away is some of them, especially the pro-transhumanists, they're actually they admit on film how they are eagerly anticipating the blending of human and animals to create a new form of superior humanity that will actually essentially be a chimera. One of the scientists said it this way. He said, this technology is going to insinuate itself into every sphere, every nook, every cranny of human activity, from the manipulation and replication of DNA to integrating our brains with technology, launching this era of change and innovation that we are calling the hybrid age. So it's here. It's happening now, and that's what people are going to learn about. Now, here's what's also interesting. Am I going too fast?
No.
Fabulous.
No, not at all. People will have to understand that, number one, this is the most critical issue of our day, because if people don't get it, you remember back in 2000, let me just say this and I'll turn you right back, why the future doesn't need us, Bill Joy, one of the co-founders of Sun Microsystem, he said this: our most powerful 21st century technologies, robotics, genetic engineering, and nanotech, are threatened to make humans an endangered species. Well, I would put in here the ultimate Luciferian dream. So basically, 15 years ago in March, this was one of the most important, poignant essays ever penned. Then Ray Kurzweil comes along and writes The Age of Spiritual Machines. So this is critical, Tom. And for those of you that don't understand this, I've got my mortgage to pay, everything. This is the end of everything. Unless Jesus intervenes, which the Word of God says He will, there'd be no flesh left alive. So continue on, Tom. I just want people to understand this. Not only did somebody write 15 years ago why the future doesn't need us anymore, the enemy of men's souls and all contemporary science and all supernaturally orchestrated technology is building to that point.
Yeah, Al, by the way, let me say something here, and thanks a moment ago, Doug, when you said people can go to skywatchtv.com, and there's or they can go to your website, Hagmann. What is it?
Hagmann&Hagmann.com, right?
Yeah, Hagmann&Hagmann.com, and there's an ad there, and they can click on it. It's not $39.95, and then we include, and the total value is $300. What we're doing is we're making the documentary Inhuman available. We're making a brand new book that we just put out that goes with the documentary called Dead Pets Don't Lie, which, by the way, isn't about pets. It's about the GMO and food industries and chemicals that the FDA is turning a blind eye to, that are making it onto the grocery shelves of stores across the nation. Basically, we're talking about something that Steve Quayle actually coined some years ago when he wrote a book called Genetic Armageddon. And we kind of picked up that term and used it as an umbrella under which we're saying everything from the foods that we eat to pet animals to transgenically altered animals and chimeric created human-animal chimeras, at least at the embryonic level, and we all know that it's more than that, to this now the next step, altered humans. So what we've done is we've said we're actually reducing the price of the documentary Inhuman and the book Dead Pets Don't Lie, which would be $45. We're actually selling those for $39.95. And right now, for a limited time, if people go there, if they buy the book and the new documentary film, we're giving them over $300 in product, and almost every bit of that product is on the subject of the genetic Armageddon. What's happening with animals, what's happening with foods, what's happening with GMOs, what's happening in laboratories, what's happening at DARPA. It's the most astonishing giveaway. And these are not stuff we have to give away. These are best-selling products, books, DVDs, movies, anyway. But we're giving it away because it is our prayer and our hope that people around the world will go there to get all the free stuff, but then when they get the documentary and they watch it, they will begin a conversation about this subject matter. That's our goal. That's our hope. That's why I'm losing money on this. And I wish I was a better salesman. I could pitch this better. This is costing me a great deal of money to be able to do this, but it's because I believe that we were given this moment in time to make this an issue. It's our best effort. It's our best hope to get the church involved in this conversation, because if they don't, and if they don't get involved in the conversation very quickly, they're going to lose their moment in time and leave it to the transhumanists to define what the future is going to be, not just for us, but for our children. God help us. But know this, it's a limited time thing. I've got a warehouse full of product. I'm giving it all away. Steve Quayle's been in my studio. He saw the warehouse. It's a huge, massive warehouse. But since midnight last night, when we changed the ad on our webpage, skywatchtv.com, I can't tell you the number of orders that have taken place per minute. It has been literally thousands and thousands of orders just since midnight last night, and that product is going to run out. So if somebody's listening to this promo, especially if you're a pastor, if you're a Sunday school teacher, if you've got a home Bible study group and you want to know more about this information, you need to go there very quickly and order the DVD and the book to get all of this giveaway, because anytime now, between now and the next few days, we're going to remove that and it'll be gone forever. Now let me I won't say any more about the deal. I just wanted to clarify that it's over $300 in product having to do with the genetics Armageddon. All right. What's happened now, while we were making the documentary over the last 5 years, Steve, as you know, there have been some very serious breakthroughs in genetics technology. One of the very first ones was what a lot of people now call CRISPR-Cas9, which is really just a very simple way and a very effective way of actually editing the DNA of fully grown humans. You can use CRISPR-Cas9 to also edit the genetics at the germline genetic level, at egg and at ova. But you can also use this for like genetic treatments where, an adult can go in, they can inject into you a CRISPR-Cas9 kit, essentially, which will cut the DNA strand to either fix or repair, some kind of defective genetic situation, or, and this is the spooky part, to introduce into the genetic code new information. This could be genetics from animals. This could be synthetic genetics. So that's a brand new, very spooky kind of technology that has just been invented. And now they've perfected using CRISPR-Cas9 for another kind of technology, which is simply called gene drive. And if you go out there now and go to Google and type in gene drive and follow it where it's talking about some of the butterflies and some of the experiments that they're doing right now, you'll find out that they're able to take existing species using CRISPR-Cas9 technology, edit their genetic makeup, so you can choose, and I think the experiment that they did was that the offspring of these butterflies or flies or whatever it is would only give birth to a certain color. But that becomes it's called gene drive because that becomes the dominant genetic code, the genotype of that species, and essentially it is capable of eradicating every normal kind of that species from that time before moving forward. In other words, we are literally talking about Watcher's technology. We are literally talking about a technology that now exists. While we were making this film, this stuff was all invented. It all came to light. It now exists and is capable of doing what the Watchers did that led to all flesh, the book of Genesis says, both man and beast, having become corrupted. So, and you might have saw the article, it can still be Googled and read, where the Chinese scientists talking about how they were using this new CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing technique in human embryos to change them at the germline genetic level. We just interviewed, for this documentary, we actually interviewed Hugo de Garis from China. He is retired now, but the Chinese are moving ahead with a significant, powerful uses of this technology with regard to humans. Of course, I think we would all admit that we think this is happening at more than just the embryonic level, which is what they were talking about. Now, if somebody's listening to the program and they're saying, okay, who cares? Germline genetic engineering, so what? So what is this? Germline genetic engineering has the potential to actually achieve the goals of the early eugenics movement, which, of course, sought to create superior humans back then through improving genetics through selective breeding. And the whole idea was that we're going to genetically modify human genes to create a new form of humanity. Well, now, through CRISPR-Cas9 technology, we can do this in embryos, we can do it in sperm, we can do it in eggs, and now we can do it in mature adults. And as a result, this germline engineering, the people that we interviewed for the documentary on human, this is considered by some of those conservative bioethicists to be the most dangerous human enhancement technology in all time. In all time. Why? Because we now have the power to truly reassemble the very nature of humanity into post-human. We now have the technology to alter human embryos, every cell, leading to heritable modifications that would extend to all succeeding generations. And for those that don't understand, debate over germline engineering has been the most critical among both liberal and conservative bioethicists because as changes to downline genetic offspring are set in motion, the nature and physical makeup of mankind be altered with no hope of reversal, permanently reshaping humanity's future. Now,
hey, Tom, the statement is, ye shall be as gods, has never been more prominent. And again, ladies and gentlemen, it starts in the book of Genesis, it'll end in the book of Revelation, but it is still the same old lie, the same old devil and his cohorts promising eternal life, escape from eternal damnation, and you get to be your own God, create your own world, enjoy infinite pleasure, and when that old body wears out, a new one is generated, and you're just downloading your essence into whatever prototype, xenotype, or future type that you want. So, Tom, again, the Christians, just deal with this real quick if you would. There are actual Christians writing essays on why this is a good thing, are there not?
Yeah, there's a growing Christian transhumanist movement, and actually, if we get a chance tonight, I will tell you why I believe that transhumanism is a replacement religion, and some of the reasons why I believe that it is being adopted by a growing segment of the world's communities and the church community, and again, mostly because churches are not even talking about this issue. Many of the leaders of churchianity, of Christianity today, they're not even aware. I think it was Derek Gilbert was telling me that at a Bible college at the university level, a recent poll was asked. One of the questions in that poll was, what do you think of transhumanism? 2% even knew what the term meant. 98% didn't even know what it meant, didn't care. And yet, we are talking about the most radical, revolutionary ideology combined with the most radical and revolutionary sciences in the world today that are set to permanently alter what it means to be a human. Now, but of that 2% that did know what it meant, they were buying into it. They're buying this whole idea that we are co-creators with God. That's a new term people can Google if they want to read more about it. Co-creators. That it's part of our responsibility to take humankind and to move us into the next step in our evolution. But people that watch this documentary Inhuman, one of the things they're going to find out is that what almost all of these technologists and these Christians that are buying into transhumanism, what they fail to comprehend, what they fail to understand, is that there is a dynamic supernaturalism that's also connected directly with our genetic makeup. You said something a moment ago, Steve, that could be a whole program all by itself. You said it's all about the blood. And I've always thought it's interesting that if you look at the Scripture, especially prophecy, and especially the Old Testament prophecies, it's all about the blood. His seed shall bruise thy seed. It's all about preserving the bloodline that would give birth to the Messiah. It was important that there be an uncontaminated bloodline leading to the time of the birth of Christ, and the ancient Hebrews understood that dynamic because they actually had lived through the contamination that gave birth to the Great Flood. A little bit later tonight, when we're talking about the new Genesis 6 documentary, what's going on in Peru and other places around the world, maybe we'll revisit this whole question about pre-diluvian and antediluvian, post-diluvian structures on the earth that actually stand as a mute testament today to that time when the earth was invaded by interlopers, alien interlopers. We call them watchers, aliens, that came down to the earth and gave birth to these giants. But they understood, and it's very important that we understand today, that there is a supernatural dynamic that is connected to our genetic makeup. Now, during this documentary, one of the things that I found very, very interesting is that there are also some transhumanists that kind of get this. In fact, the Templeton Foundation, as you know, they've been funding this whole series of conversations at Arizona State University especially, and at some other universities, in which they're talking about transhumanism, spirituality, Christianity, because they too believe that as we begin to change our genetic code and we change ourselves as humans, we will change our relationship with God and with the divine. In fact, you might have saw recently where, Mr. Singularity, Ray Kurzweil, said that by altering ourselves, we're going to put ourselves in contact with the divine. Did you see that? We're going to become as God. Well, one of the other leaders in transhumanism is the director of the Future of Humanity Institute and a professor of philosophy at Oxford University that we've talked about before, Nick Bostrom. And Nick gave testimony recently before the United Nations. And Nick is an interesting person because he started out being a very, very pro-transhumanist, very excited about how we're going to combine ourselves with animals. He still very strong in terms of his belief that we are going to create a better form of humanity by combining ourselves with synthetic forms of life, animals, and so on. But now he's suddenly becoming kind of, an apocalyptic prophet. He's starting to talk about the existential risks involved in altering ourselves and creation, which is really interesting because he's been a leading advocate of transhumanism. You can go to his website and read his transhumanist values, where he envisions remanufacturing humans with animals, plants, synthetic forms of life through recombinant DNA and CRISPR-type genetic engineering, transgenics, and so on. And what's interesting there, and I said that to say this, when I mentioned this supernatural aspect of our genetic makeup, he talks over there. Do this. If you're listening to this program tonight, go to nickbostrom.com, scroll down, and at last I looked a few months ago, it was on the left-hand side of his website. Click on his article called Transhumanist Values. That's the article he wrote when he earned his prestigious seat at Oxford University, his PhD. And note there how he talks about how animals can see into realms that humans can't. They have sonar, magnetic orientation, sensors for electricity and vibration, all these extra-human abilities. And he goes on over there to include how he thinks that those sensory modalities, the range of modalities, could be applied to transhumans through merging ourselves with animals. And he talks about how there's no fundamental block to adding these capacities, the ability to be able to see like a serpent, infrared radiation, the abilities like a bat to receive radio signals, to create a kind of telepathic sense by augmenting our brains. He goes on and on. And here's what I would say to pastors and church leaders and people that have home study groups that are listening to this program tonight and they're thinking now about this subject of transhumanism. Note this, Bostrom is absolutely correct in that the animal kingdom has levels of perception that are beyond human. Animals can sense earthquakes. They can smell tumors. They can hear, like dogs, they can hear sounds as high as 40,000 megahertz. I think dolphins something like 80,000 hertz. But it's also known that some animals see wavelengths that we would call the supernatural realm. Remember the story of Balaam's donkey. And according to that story, certain animals can see into the spirit world. Now, there have been recent studies that have indicated that animals sometimes seem to be reacting to something that is beyond normal human perception. Have you ever seen a dog that suddenly seemed to be really nervous about something? And you get this strange feeling, and you think that the dog is sensing or reacting to something. Little bitty dog might run and hide and get under the bed and scare the bejeebers out of you, right? Because they seem to be reacting to something that you yourself can't see. Well, that kind of peculiar ability be enhanced in humans in the future that have partly animal DNA integrated into their system, opening supernatural gateways that exist within the mind. This is something that we learned, even people at DARPA believe this can be achieved through altered mental states induced by psychoactive drugs like DMT and absinthe. Now, this is, of course, condemned in the Bible. It's called pharmakia, Revelation 9, sorcery, witchcraft, using drugs and advanced forms of science that seek to circumvent the will of God in order to make contact with entities that he has placed behind barriers, that he has placed behind walls. And know this, God does not make laws prohibiting the doing of something that is impossible. Meaning, in other words, it is possible. And there are those, even among military scientists today, that are imagining now a permanent pathway, a connection with the beyond, the ability to see into other dimensions, what we would call the spirit world, as a result of brain enhancement through integration and genetic alteration through integration with men and with beasts. I mean, are we literally talking here about the reinvention of the Nephilim, portions of the mind that scholars believe were closed off following the fall of man? But now you've got the Templeton Foundation at Arizona State University funding this long series of pro-transhumanist lectures titled Facing the Challenges of Transhumanism, Religion, Science, and Technology. I challenge you to go. Google those and read the articles over there, because some of the instructors do in fact believe that radical alteration of Homo sapiens is going to open a door to unseen intelligence. In fact, hey, Steve, do you remember this maybe 4 or 5 years ago now, Arizona State University launched a study called SOFIA. Remember that?
Yes, I do.
And that was actually an outgrowth of some of the early studies by the Templeton Foundation, the idea that we are going to make contact with an an extra-dimensional world. Terence McKenna, who died 2 or 3 years ago, who was the originator of the novelty theory, he was out there, going into Africa and taking these drugs and putting himself into an altered state and contacting other dimensional beings. But he was also a transhumanist, and he believed that at some point in the near future, we're going to do what DARPA is thinking about doing right now, and we are going to somehow create a stable platform in the human brain through genetics and also through artificial intelligence integration, brain-machine interfacing, so that we can put ourselves into contact with what they believe is on the other side. By the way, we're not talking about it tonight, but I believe that CERN has proven, and at some point in the future we'll talk about this, I believe that they did experiments. They've proven, in their own mind at least, the metaverse. I think they've made contact with something, because they're being very silent right now, and their silence, to me, speaks louder than words. Because keep in mind that CERN in the past has always rushed out to publish anytime they think they've made a discovery, the Higgs boson, some other boson, blah, blah, blah. And a few weeks ago, they announced that they were going to do their most powerful experiments to date for the specific purpose of seeing if they could detect graviton, weak particles that they believe, the theoretical particle that makes up gravity, escaping into a parallel universe. They made these big announcements about it. They did these powerful experiments, and unlike what they normally do, all of a sudden they zipped their lips. They haven't said a single word about what they've discovered, and I think that speaks louder than words. I think they've actually, at least in their own mind, believe that they've made contact with something. But back to humans. Imagine what it would mean now if government laboratories in the very near future, with unlimited budgets, working beyond congressional review, having now decoded gene functions that lead animals to have what we would call preternatural capabilities of sense, smell, and sight, have blended these with super soldiers, Homo sapiens. I think we're on the verge of it, and I can't put a 3-hour documentary into the next 5 minutes. But DARPA has had it in its mind for a while to create a super soldier which they could use against entire populations that would be genetically engineered, something we would call a Nephilim agent that appears to be human, but that hypothetically sees and even interacts with invisible forces. And it's going to mean Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's critical for people to understand that obviously God in His mercy, love, compassion, and intervention on His creation's behalf locked out and literally put barriers in. Let's just say this: those who were free to come and go through the dimensions were blocked until a certain time. What you and I are talking about is the fallen angel presence. I want to make it clear. It is my understanding, Tom, that fallen angels can take on human form. They can, they have access to it, but they don't possess human beings like demons do. And we need to make sure that people understand there's a difference between something that's soulless and something that has a soul that's under the impression or under the control of a demon. But saying that, CERN, even I was contacted 2 years ago by people who were saying they broke through the dimensional barrier. And I can tell you this, that all of the shutdowns, in what I was told, for what it's worth, take it to the Lord in prayer, were the people that were tasked at a certain point in America's history from keeping those dimensions being broached. They were backed off, and now every dimension, here's what I've been told, is now open for grabs. So when you talk, it doesn't matter how many trillion electron volts CERN powers up to. The fact is, when the gates are open, the gates are open, and now, that's the only thing that can explain the multidimensional parenthetical insert of evil multiplying at such a horrific rate now that it's people are just absolutely saying, where did all this evil come from? Well, my answer, and I think Tom Horn's answer, is they came through the gates. So when Jesus made the statement, the gates of hell would not prevail, the bottom line is that everything it seems like Jesus stated, the modern church just said, oh, he didn't really mean this. He's just talking in parables. Well, I got news for you. Parables don't go bump in the night, and the entities that are coming through the gates do. Having said that, do you want to draw the conclusion or the difference right now? We got about 4 minutes between something that's soulless and versus something that's demonized or under the power and presence of a demon?
Hey, actually, let me get into that after the break.
Okay.
Because I want to ask you about something. You mentioned the things that go bump in the night. What do you make of this? As you know, I was just in Arizona. I was down there for a while helping my mother, who's almost 90 years of age, had to do some different things to help her. But I want to tell you, actually, maybe we're too close to the break. Maybe I should tell you this after the break, because it has to do with the development of new synthetically produced drugs and the potential for those drugs to open gateways into another reality. My mother is almost 90 years old. She's Abe Lincoln honest. And what I want to tell you about what happened to her is absolutely, well, I want to actually, it's unbelievable, it's incredible, but I want to actually find out by telling this story if there are other people out there that have recently had exactly the same experience, and maybe we need to bring that up because it's going to take me a moment to talk about it.
Yeah, we'll wait until after the break. But here's something interesting. After 25 years or so, close to 25 years on talk radio, what I'm noticing, Tom, is that honestly, every single email I get now is of people that are even halfway alert and to this thing are talking about the preternatural, the supernatural, the multidimensional. The dreams that people are having are not just of war, famine, dead sea creatures, the 10th planet, etc. They're having a new, I guess you'd say, a higher level of understanding, and some people are instantly being given the understanding, and it's like knowledge is increasing almost on a portal type way. In other words, let's say there are 10 doors to go through in a person's life, and I'm not talking metaphysically now. I'm just saying, let's say different areas of interest. It's now like all those 10 are coming rushing to the forefront, and what you thought was the end of the road only starts out as the beginning of the road. So what I'm saying is there is multi-dimensional information being passed through to human beings on a never before recorded, and you study history, I study history, we listen to all the guys, but it's never been like this before. And that's exactly what Jesus said. There's never been a time like it, nor would be again. Again, I think that people ought to recognize that what we're talking about is pertinent, it's relevant, and it is a battle beyond the stars. It is a multidimensional battle that God has warned us about, and his people are not able to fight it unless they understand it. Doug,
Indeed.
Do you want to take a break?
Yes. And this is one of the most fascinating topics. Our guests tonight, Steve Quayle and Tom Horn. Folks, portions of tonight's broadcast brought to you by Nuts.com. Nuts.com. Thanksgiving is coming up. Where are you going to go? Nuts.com has over 3,000 healthy snacks to choose from. be a hit at your Thanksgiving party. Nuts.com, microphone code HH. That's microphone code HH. Nuts.com, microphone HH. We're going to be right back after the network news. Stay with us.
Just what kind of thriller predicts the future? In 3 days in the belly of the beast, Daniel Holdings wrote about the God particle before CERN actually discovered the God particle. In As the Darkness Falls, Daniel wrote about an Islamist terrorist confederacy that rose up out of Syria and declared a caliphate 3 years before ISIS was ever heard of. In his newest novel, Between the Veil, Daniel talks about a space between dimensions where supernatural beings can walk. He says that these novels are a warning from the Creator to his creation. Will war come to America? Will the world's economies collapse? Are we looking at increased earthquakes and volcanic activity? Will the United States fall into civil war? You can find all of Daniel's work at his website, danielholdings.com. That's danielholdings.com. All of these things and more are talked about in Daniel's books. To find out what's coming next, go to danielholdings.com.
Hi, it's Lynn Oz, and believe it or not, there is just a little something that you can do to help change the lives of some of our veterans in need. I will be joining L.A. Marzulli, Doug and Joe Hagman, John B. Wells, Coach Dave Daubenmire, Dr. Ted Brower, Greg Jackson, Reverend Flip Benham, and Benjamin Baruch this March 18th through 20th, 2016 in Dallas, Texas for the Hear the Watchman Conference Revival and Worship event. We want to bring as many veterans in need as possible to the event so they can receive the blessings of Jesus Christ and be part of this incredible event. Join all of us and the team at American Survival Wholesale to make this happen by visiting www.hearthewatchmen.com and donating a little something, or by clicking on the American Wholesale logo and purchasing their Veterans Day special. Please help us remember those who gave so freely in defense of our freedom and now need our help. Again, visit www.hearthewatchmen.com today. Also, be sure and visit our sponsors, American Survival Wholesale. Their website is AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com. I look forward to seeing all of you at the conference and meeting you in person. Don't forget to spread the word and share the website www.hearthewatchmen.com with everyone you can, so everyone can participate in the Hear the Watchman Conference Revival and Worship event in March of 2016.
You are listening to the Hagman and Hagman Report on the Global Star Radio Network. Stay tuned. Doug and Joe will be right back. Listening to the Hagman and Hagman Report on the Global Star Radio Network. Stay tuned. Doug and Joe will return shortly. You're listening to the Hagman and Hagman Report on the Global Star Radio Network. Stay tuned. Doug and Joe will return shortly. listening to...
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to hour number 2 of this Tuesday, November 17th, 2015 edition of the Hagman and Hagman Report. We have with us Steve Quayle from stevequayle.com and Mr. Tom Horn tonight, and we are talking about transhumanism as well as other things. We're going to get right back into this. But first,
you know what? We're so thankful to have both gentlemen with us. This is so important, and please, folks, pay attention to what they're saying. Before we get to our guests, I just want to mention that we found a great website, folks. With Thanksgiving next week, can you believe it's just upon us so quickly? My wife and I were talking about hosting Thanksgiving dinner for our immediate family, and we were looking at, and this is true, we were looking at the snacks, and I got to tell you, Joe's, he's invited too, but anyway, right away we said nuts.com, ladies and gentlemen, nuts.com. But you have to just go to nuts.com and use the microphone code HH. That's nuts.com, microphone code HH. Right now you can get you can choose from over 3,000 different varieties of healthy snacks, nuts, dried fruits, sweet treats, whatever you want, cooking and baking goods. You could spend literally an hour or more on this website alone, nuts.com. They offer so much to so many this is quality snacks. And we were looking for a company like this. This is a company that I'm not afraid to recommend to my Christian brethren, to my friends, to my family, and I've done so. And we get from nuts.com. We purchase from them. And just, close your eyes for a minute and just, can you smell the aroma of roasted nuts? Well, that's what it's like to open a bag from nuts.com. Folks, with Thanksgiving Day next week, go to nuts.com, put in our microphone code HH or code HH in the microphone box, and choose from the the vast array of choices there. And if you use our code HH, you get 4 free samples. That's a $15 value. And you can choose from over 50 options. Right now, nuts.com, enter our code HH in the microphone box. Let's get right back to Mr. Steve Quayle and Mr. Tom Horn. What a great pair. Steve, going to give it to you. And Tom was talking about an experience with his mom, and maybe you can pursue that.
Well, one of the things that Tom was talking about before we went to break was obviously the word pharmakia, from which we get the word pharmacy, sorceries, and he was going to share, and right now we'll have him share, about something that's happened or is going on in his 90-year-old mother's life. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, but first of all, nuts.com, you made me hungry, brother. Look, I want people to know that my daughter lost, 130 pounds or something. She's in the best health of her life ever. She went on this gluten-free, diet. Yeah. So I decided that I was going to do it too and cut out all the crap. Don't eat no crap, but you can eat nuts. You can eat those kind of healthy kind of things like you're talking about. So I'm going to be going there, nuts.com. In the last 60 days, have lost 20 pounds and absolutely cured my diabetes. My blood sugar is at normal levels now, and that just by eating the right kind of foods, cutting out gluten out of my diet, and somebody told and eating things like nuts. So you made me hungry, brother. I'm going to go there. I'm going to go to nuts.com.
They're delicious.
I'm going to do it.
Well, just make sure, microphone code HH, and tell them the
Hagman. I'm going to do it.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
I'm going to do it.
I'm glad you're in better health there. That's so important, especially in these end of times. Go ahead, Mr.
Well, and you know what I found out was, so I hear all these people talking about gluten-free and blah, blah, blah. Our forefathers and foremothers ate wheat all of their life. Why is all of a sudden gluten an issue? Well, I found out it's because of all the chemicals that they're using to treat the raising of wheat in the fields. That it's not even actually, if you could get heirloom wheat, it's not the wheat, it's the chemicals that they're using. So that's kind of what we're talking about again tonight, genetic Armageddon. Now, before we went to the break, and before you got me all excited about going to nuts.com and getting some of those, samples for the Thanksgiving holiday, before you got my mind diverted onto the nut product, Hey, Steve, I want to ask all three of you guys, Joe, Doug, and Steve, but Steve, because of your background and all this, I want to ask you in particular to give me your feedback on this. There's two things. I want to say two things about recent science development that reminded me of what the Watchers did in the Old Testament, but the first was very, very near to home. My mother, she's nearly 90 years old, and I'm going to make this as short as I possibly can. Not long ago, she started seeing red spots in her right eye. So, not really abnormal for a person of her age. She goes to see the doctor, telling the doctor she's seeing spots in this right eye. He tells her he wants to try a new experimental eye drop. It's an experimental drug. Now, he tells her, he says it's going to burn like fire for a few minutes, but he thinks it will fix the problem of seeing these eye drops. So she agrees. He puts the eye drops in her right eye, then he covers her eye with gauze and a patch, and he tells her, don't remove the patch until the following day. Sure enough, burns like fire for a couple of hours, then the pain goes away. She leaves the patch on. To get this, guys, the next day, she takes the patch off of her eye, and my mom is nearly knocked out of her wheelchair. Why? Because she can see people walking through, she called them people, weird-looking people, and they're walking through her house. They're looking at her. Whenever she covers the treated eye, she doesn't see anybody. She just sees the world as we see it. If she covers the good eye and opens the treated eye vividly, there are dozens of humanoid beings, and they're walking through her home. There's lots of them, and they're vivid. Now, some of these notice that she can see them now, and they stop and they start looking at her as if they're not accustomed to somebody being able to see them.
That's not good.
Others seem like they're interested in some of the stuff that's in her house. Well, she's terrified. And my mom's Abe Lincoln on it. Old-fashioned, Christianity, never told a fib, in her entire adult life. She's absolutely terrified. She's out of her mind with fear. And the moment that the fear comes rushing in, right as she's becoming fearful, she says this very young, beautiful man walks into the room, walks over and literally sits right next to her. He sits on her couch, right next to her wheelchair. Doesn't say anything. But somehow immediately she knows it's okay. And none of whoever these people walking through her house are going to hurt her. They can't touch her. Somehow she knows that. She actually even goes to sleep, but she won't get out of her wheelchair. For 9 days, every single day, as she wakes up, if she covers one eye, don't see nothing. Covers the good eye, opens the one that had the experimental drug treatment, there's weird-looking people. And they're walking through her house. As she hits the 8th day, they start getting a little bit hazy and harder to see, kind of like somebody's pulled a screen down now that she's looking through. On the 9th day, she can barely see them anymore. And then by that evening, the phenomenon ends, and it's never come back again. Now, by the way, my mom told me this story before I went down there. She actually called me when it was happening, when it first was happening, because she was terrified. My sister, who lives with her, had called me too, completely freaking out about it. That was part of the reason I had to go down there. But by the time I got there, it was past the 9th day. I think it's interesting the number 9 mentioned, because 9, and I have to go back and look these up again, but I remember when I was a pastor making notes about this, there are 9 specific places in the Old Testament where it speaks of those who use sorcery for making contact with the other realm. But then in the New Testament, there are 9 gifts of the Spirit. both of these speak of both the negative and the positive side of making communication with the supernatural realm. Now, when I knew that I was going to be on the Hagmann and Hagmann show tonight, I actually emailed Sharon Gilbert, who's a molecular biologist, works for my company full-time, and I told her the story. I hadn't told her that story till today. And I told her the story, asked her what she made of it. Here's what she emailed me back. She said, Tom, that's incredible, but it's not the only time something like this has been reported, although it's assumed that most patients of this experience that are seeing things are mentally unstable, and therefore optometrists don't talk about it. They ignore it. They diagnose these so-called visions as what they call Charles Bonnet syndrome. It's often referred to as a manifestation of the brain's reaction to sensory deprivation. I'm reading her email. The eye being oculated artificially by a covering of physiologically through disease. Now, here's what Sharon says. This is a bunch of scientific claptrap trying to explain experiences beyond our physical reality. It's compared to phantom limb sensations, but for the eyes. Here's what she says. But I suspect your mom was really seeing into the spirit realm, though the reason for it is unclear. Your email is well-timed since I'm spending most of my time on either an ice pack or heating pad after throwing my back out Sunday. She goes into some of that. But I'm working through books on the military's past research and how that coincided with post-Babylon working events of the 1950s and 60s. The unseen realm has been bleeding into ours since before the flood, but a massive assault on science and scientists seems to coincide with the mid to late 19th century, just as the eugenics movement took hold. I'm not sure where I'm going with this, except that the enemy's been directing humanity toward an end game that appears to be using science and PSI in science to pull us away from God Almighty and toward a counterfeit spirituality culminating in a new man, the inhuman being. The most interesting part of your mom's vision is that beautiful young man who helped her know that she was okay, that she need not fear. The Lord knows his realm for his reasons. Your mom must be very special. So I thought I would share that with you guys tonight. You're the very first radio broadcast that I've told this to. Anybody out there that knows my mom, of course, would be blown away by this because, again, she's Abe Lincoln honest. She would never make up a story that isn't true. But now I want to ask you guys, what do you make of the fact that here you have a doctor, and you know how doctors are, they get these test drugs sent to them all the time because the pharmaceutical industry is hoping that if they use it and they promote it and it does well, it helps them get their product out there, and they stand to make, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars on a new therapy or a new treatment. What do you guys make of the fact that here's my mother, she's seeing red spots, the doctor says, well, we've just received this new experimental drug, puts it on her eye, and all of a sudden for 9 days, a very important biblical numerological number, for 9 days, she sees these strange-looking people walking back and forth, but only through that eye. If she covers that eye, she doesn't see anything through the other eye.
I'd like to address that, if I might, Doug.
Please.
Sure,
one of the most famous when it comes to eye surgery, and the only man I believe that's ever transplanted an eye, being able to attach the optic nerve, etc., is Dr. Ernst Muldeshef. You can Google that name too, or not Google, but go on whatever internet search, probably start page, you'll be safer. The point being is that I believe, Tom, what happened to your mother is that since the Nazis started their eugenic program, and I get into this, by the way, and that's why, again, my new book, Empire Beneath the Ice, How the Nazis Won World War II, and I believe that, I defend it, and I think people will come to the agreement. But one of the most interesting things to me was the occult knowledge of the Nazis wanting to open up the third eye. Well, interestingly enough, Dr. Muldeshef, I'm not talking about an occult thing now. I want people to understand something. When Adam fell, Adam lost the ability to be able to know without teaching or being taught. He simply knew things because he was creating the image and likeness of God, and to that point, before the fall, he was able to tap into it. What's happening, in my opinion, with your mother is that whatever the chemicals were have basically been able to activate that part of her brain or that part of her eye. And I'm not talking your mother's got a third eye. I want to make that clear.
Sure.
But what I'm saying is this, is that, number one, I'd like to know the compound, but number two, I believe this is a direct fulfillment of a word that was given 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, maybe longer. I'm losing track of time because it's all coming together, but God said you are going to see the unseen world. That which has been kept from you will be opened up before you. So it is my immediate response, knowing what Dr. Muldashev, by the way, he's one of Russia's leading, if you will, gentlemen who goes around the world looking for giants, and I've referred to him as finding one in the caves of Nepal and literally being shown the giants in stasis. I don't know if you've ever heard me talk about that, Tom, but what's happening to your mother simply is this, that through an interaction with that drug and her whatever the cause of the spots, there was an interaction. That interaction allowed her to see into the spiritual world. The young man obviously would probably be an angel, but we're surrounded. The Bible says we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, but we're also surrounded by the demonic realm. And I remember the Lord specifically saying, and I think Doug, I don't know if you and I knew each other or was on my radio show, saying the unseen realm, the things of people's nightmares would manifest in the flesh. So what's happened simply, I think, is a modern day, bless your mother, but she's having a fulfillment of the scripture where those dimensions now, where they once had barriers or separation, and you know God put the barriers of creation in for our safety. I believe that whatever the drug was, coupled with whatever your mother's underlying issue was, if they've been able to diagnose it, but evidently that drug was able to trigger something to activate her, if you will, spiritual eyesight. And this is not New Age. This is simply something that God, in His mercy, had kept us from. Can you imagine living with all the evil if we saw it every day?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so anyway, what I'm saying is the dimensions are opening, and that's exactly what CERN is doing. CERN is acting as a master lock, and it's unlocking. It's allowing these things to come through. And behind the scenes, there are scientists that work at CERN that are basically having their minds blown, and some of them actually have been assassinated. The point being is we're at that time. So that's probably one of the most interesting things I've heard all year. And I would like to know if you'll just email me the drug. I'm not going to go try it.
I'm asking her to get that for me. You know, my mother was so blown away by it that she obviously didn't even ask the doctor what the drug was. He just treated her. Right. She went home, and then this was going on. She was freaking out. She called me. It was partly why I had to go down there. And I brought it up because of with the documentary that we're putting out on transhumanism and knowing what DARPA wants to do and how they're trying to experiment with brain chemistry, and there is this occult belief system that they will be able to put themselves into contact with other realities. And you mentioned CERN. Well, anybody can go to Google and type in Sergio Bertolucci. He is the director of science at CERN. Read his own words. He says we're going to open a doorway at CERN, and we're going to send something through, or maybe something will come through. So they definitely are trying to make contact with other intelligence. There was another news report that people can read that came out earlier this week on another scientist who thinks he has found evidence for the multiverse. And what people need to know is these people not only believe that there are other dimensions, they believe there's intelligence there. And so if you watch their own, there's a full-on documentary you can watch on YouTube. I'm trying to think of the name of it right now, but it's on string theory, and they talk about how they're going to use CERN and the particle collider to film whether gravitons are escaping into a parallel universe. But when you watch their depictions, they depict other people, other entities. other realities that exist in these parallel universes, just like the reality that we live in. So, but I brought that up about my mother in hopes that if there are people out there that recently have received the same experimental eye treatment, and especially if they had exactly the same results, I'd like to hear from them. I'd like to document that we have created a synthetic form of treatment. It is, I don't know what it is. Is it something that is a genetically modified what? I don't know. What is it? It's a synthetic something. He told
or
her.
A nano. It could be also a nano drug. You know, the point being is that whatever. And did your mother give you the actual name of the disease?
No, that's what I'm saying. Is I've asked her to get that for me, and
Yeah.
I just now got back from the trip. But I've asked her to get the information for me. I want to know the name of the drug, and but I'm bringing it up on your show because I happen to be here. And knowing that in our documentary there were people who were speaking for DARPA and for the Pentagon, who were talking about brain chemistry and the fact that you've got pro-transhumanists like the Templeton Foundation at Arizona State University and other universities saying that it's an intentional effort. They believe that there is something there, and they want to put themselves in contact. And in fact, the Sophia Project at Arizona State University went so far as to even say things like this. It said, whatever it is, whether it be angels, God, demons, aliens, a universal mind. So they've named what we in Christianity would traditionally define as the supernatural realm. They believe that it's there. They believe it exists. And there is an intentional effort now to create a kind of brain chemistry that could put them in touch with it. Now, there's another thing I want to tell you.
Dr. Horn, before you continue, just real quick, we're getting a couple of emails about people who want to pass along similar events, personal events, so they appear credible. What's the best way for them to contact or provide this information to you via email?
Please do, and email that to Tom Horn, TOMHORN, at defenderpublishing.com. Now, if they forget, then just go to skywatchtv.com. There's a contact button there. Click on the contact button. But it's better if you can email me at tomhorn at defenderpublishing.com. That's a more direct way of getting directly a hold of me.
Thank you, Dr. Horn. Thank you.
Now, there's another thing I want to tell you about. And in a moment, Steve, I'd like to kind of turn the conversation topsy-turvy and start talking to you about your current research. I want to know more about the Empire Beneath the Ice, but I also want to ask you about your brand new documentary and the documentary series. But before we go there, there's one other thing I wanted to tell you. And you gentlemen tonight are the first people to know this. I have en route to me, I had hoped to have it by today, but it's being shipped to me right now. Now, I know this sounds all mysterious. I can't tell you the name of the laboratory. At some point, I will. I'm friends with a person who happens to own a laboratory that does accelerated research into things like CRISPR-Cas9, that kind of thing. There's a brand new kit, and I'm going to be the recipient of one of the very first ones. It's coming to me. It's actually has to be shipped in dry ice. It has to be refrigerated because we're talking about living organisms. And I will talk about this more in the near future. I'm actually going to put it in a case with dry ice. I'm going to take it with me onto programs like Jim Baker, Sid Roth, other programs like that. I will have it on skywatchtv.com. But I have a kit being shipped to me now. It's the most advanced genetics kit. And here's what I want to tell you about it. With this kit, mankind will now be able to change the genetic code of humans so as to allow, once again, for the incarnation of fallen angels into bodies of flesh. That's my belief. This is the most powerful genetics kit in the world today. And what it will do is allow for the altering of adult persons and have their DNA altered in such a way that anything can be written into their genetic makeup, which will then become heritable. It's my opinion that it allows for the incarnation of fallen angels because it perfectly matches, in my opinion, with what happened in the days of Noah. It's coming to me right now. I will have it within the next 36 hours. And then I'll be going on television and I will be talking about it. That's the reason that I have worked so hard, so diligent to get the Inhuman documentary produced so quickly, because that's the moment we have entered into. And the church now must take up this issue, must begin talking about it, because if they don't, well, then we leave it to the watchers. We leave it to the pro-transhumanists to define the language, the legalese that will now be used. People probably don't know this. You know, a week ago or so, the National Institute of Health put a moratorium on federal funds, restricting the use of federal funds for the creation of human-animal chimeras. Did you see that research? And a lot of the people working, in the laboratories across the nation freaking out because the NIH put a moratorium. Did you see those news stories?
Yeah,
I did not.
I did. And there was Tom. There was a YouTube that was made about that, but there was also some sort of disclosure or discussion or suggestion. I don't know what it is that the Black Ops or the Black Budget is funding that process.
Well, here's the thing. Here's the reason they did that. The reason they did it is because a new gene drive type technology has been developed, which piggybacks off of CRISPR-Cas9, and there's more than Cas9. There's other Cas tools that can be used. CRISPR-Cas9 is the first one. There's others that I'm being told now are even more powerful. It doesn't matter. The technology is there now between CRISPR-Cas9 and gene drive to interrupt the genetic makeup of an adult specimen. So literally through gene therapy, use a kit, and in this kit, you could literally inject this into a grown individual, so that it will find the DNA strand, and it will cut and paste. It will cut that DNA strand, and then you inject whatever the new correction to the gene type or whatever it is you want, and it'll go there, and it'll match up to where that cut was made in the DNA, and it'll repair itself, and it'll grow together. So, wonderful tool to be used for making corrections to genetic issues. It's the kind of technology that will probably ultimately lead to the cure for things like cancer. The world is going to celebrate it. What the world mostly isn't going to be talking about, however, is that exactly the same technology can be used now to write alien code into the human genetic code, into the human genotype, which then becomes heritable and will be transmitted to all downline individuals. And CRISPR technology, anything that can procreate, whether it's a rabbit or a human, anything that can procreate, that has sperm and ova, can be modified now with CRISPR technology. But the newest versions of CRISPR technology can do even more than that. It can create gene drive, which will modify everything born down line. So why did NIH suddenly put a moratorium on the use of federal dollars, This doesn't have anything to do with private dollars. Federal dollars for the creation of human-animal chimeras. They did that temporarily. It's a temporary restraint because of this new powerful technology. Because now the technology exists to create X-Men. The technology exists to literally start changing the genotype of humans in such a way that the phenotypic expressions of humans is going to be modified. This is something that the Jasons, it's something that our movie Inhuman goes into. It's something they've been warning about for some time. You know, the Jasons, like 2 years ago, put out a white paper called the $100 Genome Implications for the DoD, and all they talked about was genotype and phenotype. If people don't know what that means, genotype is what you get from your parents. Genotype is the blueprint of any species. So if your parents were human, then you received the blueprint to become a human. If your parents were a rabbit, you receive the blueprint, the genotype, that is indicative of becoming a rabbit. However, phenotype is how that is expressed. It's what we see. It's how you walk. It's how you talk. A rabbit hops. A rabbit eats grass. That's the phenotypic expression. It's what you see with your eyes. In humans, it's the fact that you're a bipedal. It's the fact that you walk on two legs, that you have thumbs, that you're not like a monkey, that you have the ability to hear the broadcast that we're making right now and analyze what I'm saying to you as I speak. That's the phenotypic expression of your genotypic human makeup. And what CRISPR-Cas9 and GeneDrive and the Jasons are saying is, as we begin to alter humans at the germline genetic level, their phenotypic expressions are going to change. They're going to begin walking different. They're going to look different. They're going to think different. They're going to act different. As we merge them with animals, for instance, they're going to take up animalistic behaviors. Crime scenes are going to change. Rape scenes are going to change. You will no longer be able to send a CSI crew into a crime scene and have them be able to say, we're looking for, a male in his 20s, blah, blah, blah. You're not going to be able to do that anymore if this creature is part animal. Everything about the phenotypic expression is going to change. By the way, this was dramatically illustrated by Yvon Balaban of the McGill University in Montreal, Canada, not a long time ago, when he took the developing brain matter of embryonic chickens and integrated it, engineered it into the developing brain matter of embryonic quail. And the chickens, when they were born, started exhibiting the head bobs and the vocal trills of quail, and yet they were chickens. What his experiments illustrated is that very, very complex behavior patterns can be transferred across species barriers through genetic engineering. This is exactly what the Watchers did. This is exactly what Jesus meant when he said, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it also be in the coming of the Son of Man. It's why he put barriers between the species. But now we're crossing over those species barriers. And this week, within 36 hours, I will have within my possession a genetic tool that can repeat for the first time since the Great Flood exactly what happened in the days of Noah. So I'm getting it. Why am I getting it? I definitely don't plan to use it. I'm getting it because I want to be able to illustrate a couple of things. Number one, first of all, if Tom Horn can get this kind of a genetics tool, imagine what bioterrorists would be able to do. If I can get it, imagine what they've got their hands on right now, and the apocalyptica that groups like ISIS and whatever have in their mind. But secondly, imagine how much we now have entered into a period of time that only one time before ever existed, and that was at the time of Genesis. And now we should talk about, because I could go on and waste a lot of time here, we should talk about Steve Quayle's Gen 6 production, because it actually deals with this whole issue of the days of Noah and the Testament around it and what's coming next.
Well, thank you. And for the record, Doug, I just put up on my website, stevequayle.com, CRISPRs, and CRISPRS, and that stands for Clusters Regularly Interspaced Short Palindromic Repeats, are segments of prokaryotic DNA containing short repetitions of base sequences. Let me make it real simple. The bottom line is what Tom is talking about is not only genetic alteration, but it's also the base process. And the reason it's got to be cooled is because it deals with stem cells. And for some time, I remember when I first started talking almost 15 years ago that humans could be cloned and humans could be growing up at accelerated speed and that their collective subconscious could be downloaded. People used to think that, I was either smoking wacky tobacco or just flat out crazy. But what Tom just explained to you in detail is one of the major concerns that he and I both have, which brings me to why I entered into the book. I'm just going to talk about Empire Beneath the Ice, how the Nazis won World War II. The absolute desire to penetrate the spiritual membrane, if you will, was one of the most expensive undertakings of the Third Reich. The SS went overboard, pun intended, to literally search the four corners of the world. And what they were fixated on, Tom, as you probably know, is the genetic Superman, the Ubermensch. They went so far as to, recreate anthropology and basically state that the Cro-Magnon had made war on the Neanderthals and they had won, and so therefore they were saying that the Cro-Magnons were a superior species, and that's obviously why they went on all the work for looking for skulls. Well, people can say, well, that really isn't significant until you understand that under Operation Paperclip, all the Nazi scientists, not just the rocket scientists like Dr. Werner von Braun being the most famous, but their geneticists and the guys that were experimenting in this realm. And also, one of the very first operable Stargates, according to multiple four-star generals I talked to over 10 years ago, stated was the one that's seen in Hellboy. I'm not recommending people see that. I'm just telling you that there was a science fiction movie starring Ron Perlman, and that scene is there. Now, getting into True Legends, a series, they who control the past determine the future. And what we're doing right now, and by the way, episode 2 and 3 are underway. And without letting the cat out of the bag, I showed you, Tom, the 4-minute introduction to it, and I think it's going to be pretty mind-blowing. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely, man. And actually my first comment back to you was, okay, you've gone to Hollywood now, because the production level is astonishing, and I don't know what I can say. I don't know if I'm supposed to mention what it was I saw in the film.
No, I'd like to leave it, but I had a very talented man named Chris who got a hold of me after listening to me on Coast to Coast and Hagman. He lives in the world of Hollywood special effects, but also is quite an expert and an adept at all the giant stuff. So in order to bring the Return of the Giants to the screen, we had to duplicate a scene from the movie, and actually we're using the Book of Enoch as the narration to let people understand what they're seeing on the screen. Well, that's enough of a hint. True Legends Episode 1 is absolutely necessary because we built on David Flynn's masterful revelation that basically the geoglyphs in Tiwanaku that are in Peru are absolutely, in Bolivia on the border, on the what's called the Altiplano, are a language unto themselves. Jesus said if the people didn't praise him as he rode in Jerusalem, the stones would cry out. What you have in the plains of Tiwanaku is a literal, if you will, the angels wrote their version, the fallen angels, Kilroy was here. One of the most frustrating things, I had a guy that was working with me, but he's gotten too busy, so I need to ask again for anybody who is basically good at pattern recognition, who is advanced computer code, and basically can write in a three-dimensional, not only binary, but a trinary code, to please contact me. Because here's the deal, Tom. Imagine this. Imagine the fallen angels, and we know this from the Book of Enoch and the Book of Giants, both the Dead Sea Scrolls, incorporating the Dead Sea Scrolls, were basically informed of the great judgment that the flood that God was going to bring against them for having basically polluted the human genome. And in preparing that, they wanted to leave their testimony. Now, we have, obviously, ancient monuments. We have huge rock structures that are built before the flood, and then we've got some big ones built after the flood. But what was built before the flood in the age of giants, I'm talking 36 feet and above, was totally different than what was built after. In the Old Testament, after the flood, we know that we have King Og being probably the tallest guy mentioned at 18 feet. But the point that people have got to understand is that in True Legends, a series, the technology of the fallen, people look at history as it's presented to them and think that the historians are telling the truth. Couldn't be further from the truth. And just in the last couple days, I want to give you an interesting thing that happened, Tom, a week ago, and this will be incorporated into the next DVD series. This literally happened. The gentleman that flew the Dead Giant out of Afghanistan, Bagram Air Force Base in 2005, wrote me an email, or wrote me a letter, called me from Korea, and told me his story. Fast forward, 2011, the same gentleman in the Air Force is in New Mexico, and in New Mexico, he's just sitting having a beer, and a Navajo elder comes up to him. Now, understand, this guy's never seen the native elder before. Obviously, they don't know each other. No mention is made of anything. And the native starts to sing. The Navajo starts to sing over him in what's called a thing. So he starts chanting over my friend, who is the guy that flew the dead giant, out of Afghanistan. And he puts his hand on him and says, "I must pray for you." After his sing, he looks him in the eyes and he said, "You have seen giants. The earth is opening up. Once again, the giants that the earth swallowed up will disgorge the giants. They're coming back to earth, and you must tell the people." And my friend said, "Well, there's no way he could have known that." The guy took him again by the arm and just looked at him and said, "The earth swallowed them up. The earth will vomit them out. They're coming back. Warn the people." And so that just happened. Now, here's an interesting thing. What people don't understand about, and I can't explain it, but I can define it, but I cannot explain how it works. Every image we've ever seen, obviously, we're told in the Bible that everything we've ever said, everything we've ever done, instantly we're going to be known as we are. But there seems to be, if you will, what I would call a long, almost an eternal playing movie or DVD in our brain that others can access. Now, people used to think this would be science fiction, but isn't DARPA now, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, aren't they working in that same dimension? They're announcing it. I will tell everyone this: whatever they announce, they already possess. Whenever they say they're working on it, they got it. Remember, in the world of defense, everything is ultimate top secret until there becomes a point where the commercialization overrules or overwhelms the need to keep it secret. In the same category of unusual thoughts, it might be interesting to you, Tom, that a certain individual made known to our research team that when Zecharia Sitchin was writing a lot of his works, he was being, if you will, schooled by the Jesuits to bring about the whole writing on the Anunnaki. And what's fascinating, I tell people, I have no problems with his evidence. I have every problem with his conclusion. So, fast forward to Tom Horn and Chris Putnam, and I hope I'm being as linear as I know how to be, and the work you've done with the Vatican. it's fascinating that from the beginning, Genesis 6 has had to be controlled, and the sons of God saw that the daughters of earth were fair. It says both in those days and after those days, before the flood and after the flood. Knowing this, and maybe you knew this before, but knowing that the Jesuits overwhelmingly controlled the narrative on Genesis 6 giants to take away from the fallen angel the heavenly aspect of it and the Word of God, does that maybe put some of the things that you and Chris have been investigating in all your Exo Vaticana and the things that you're writing about, does that put a new spin on things for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. As a matter of fact, so much so, and I want to hear you talk and not me this next hour and a half. So, but so much so that we've determined that now we finished Inhuman, the documentary. Our very next project is going to be to go back. We've got literally dozens of hours of film that the world has never seen. From the Vatican, from people like Guy Consolmagno, from some of the Vatican's Opus Dei level theologians who are intentionally preparing now for the arrival of an alien intelligence. And as a matter of fact, you might have noticed where Sci-Fi, SWY, whatever it is, the Sci-Fi channel, you might have saw where this winter they're going to start playing the Childhood Inn series based on Clarke.
Arthur Clarke?
Yeah, based on his Childhood Inn, which is going to have these gigantic aliens coming down from outer space. But once the overlords are revealed to humanity, we come to learn that these are actually the beings that the Bible defined as the devil and his angels, but according to Childhood Inn, the world is going to be educated that these are actually the good guys, and that the God of the Bible is the bad guy. So we are, we're working on that right now. That'll be the next documentary following this one. Steve, when is, a couple of things very quickly, when is your book, Empire Beneath the Ice? When's that going to be available?
December 1st. If I took pre-orders, my wife would strangle me because we got so many, and I said I don't want to live with the firestorm of that. But I think people will really have their mind blown. There's so many for instances. When I say how the Nazis won World War II, the pharmaceutical industries that we now have and that are now every other commercial on TV. Those were born out of the German industrial base, period. All of the scientists brought in under Operation Paperclip. Most people do not know that we went to war in 1947 in the Antarctic with the Nazis. The Russians even knew that the Germans had pretty much accomplished space flight using advanced saucer technology, the Hannibal, etc. But what's really interesting to me, Tom, is that after, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago now, after doing Coast to Coast talking about Operation High Jump, that I was contacted by the great-grandson of Admiral Dönitz, who was basically the Fuhrer when they thought Hitler had been killed or committed suicide. By the way, Hitler never committed suicide. And for the record, everyone, if you're noticing all the new books, even the new series that's going to be on TV, it's all coming back into the forefront. I don't know if you know that, Tom, but there's a whole new TV series on, if you will, the reemergence of the Third Reich. When you're led to do something, as you have been, when I'm led to do something, and the corresponding correlation and timing is always the most mind-blowing thing to me. And so Empire Beneath the Ice, 520 pages, but the most amazing stuff is in the supernatural realm. In other words, we're not talking about just a bright bunch of German engineers going into, the best machine shop in the best machine shops on the planet. We're talking about a source of intelligence that gave them the ability to basically transcend
the normal V2 rocket. The V2 rocket and all the Saturn space vehicles, etc. Everything that was for public consumption. The real secret stuff has always been hidden. Enter Stargates. The whole situation with the Third Reich, and they're looking for the third eye. Most people don't know that obviously the Ahnenerbe, which was sent all over the world to find artifacts and to look for people that possessed supernatural skills, talents, and abilities, was to incorporate them into a genetic race, a pure Aryan race. And so what's fascinating to me, look fast forward now, we're at 2015, soon to be 2016, and we're hearing the globalists, the industrialists, the Illuminists, the Luciferians, etc., talking about too many people on the planet, Georgia Guidestone.
Yeah.
Yet we're also talking about everything from advanced robotics, CRISPR technology, gene splicing, gene editing, cloning, and I'm telling people there's no clowning when you're cloning. So it's critical that people understand this is the end of man that Jesus spoke about in the original creation. Now, why is that critical? Because Satan hates Jesus and hates God so much that he cannot get at Jesus or God, and they are victorious. They'll consume him with the breath of the Lord Jesus' mouth and the sharp two-edged sword coming out of it. But the point is that up until that time, total war is being made and levied against the descendants of Adam and Eve. And if I pray tonight, and I'm sure you have too, if people can hear with their ears and their eyes of understanding by the grace of God to recognize the lateness of the hour, so God in his infinite majesty and love for his creation must act very soon, because this thing, is it a fair statement, Tom, that everything that we've warned about and talked about now is even beyond the initial warning? It's all in play, and it's going to be Fallen Angel Day very soon, and the idea of attenuating, augmenting, fixing, repairing, supercharging a human being to the point of it will be the ultimate drug of choice. When I say drug, it is the most deceptive bait in the universe, and it's my contention that we're buying it, hook, line, and sinker. True Legends, the series right now, is we are absolutely going to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that who's controlling the history, why it's being controlled, and I think we're going to bring some pretty mind-boggling things, to the forefront. And when people understand that Jesus says men's hearts will fail them for looking after those things coming up, on the earth, we are absolutely sensing that and seeing that in real time. And as many years as I've known the pilot that flew the Giant out of Afghanistan, just by chance, he brought up and said, a funny thing happened to me 6 years after that. And I took him and I said, man, you don't get it. That's the key. So anyway, God bless him and thank him for that. But we're seeing now just not only the knowledge increasing at, I would say this, at the speed of light, or actually beyond the speed of light, at a dimensional interface, okay? A dimensional interface, in my terminology, means a dumping, if you will, a downloading of that information and understanding that exists beyond the realm of mere mortals, and the accelerating, if you will, mindset to be able to embrace it, because that's what Daniel was talking about, knowledge running to and fro. And isn't it interesting that as you run to and fro, as we run to and fro, we run into the same, if you will, we come into contact with the same historic milestones, but the important ones, it's like the time seal is being opened and all of the information that's been hidden in arcane is being released. So when we come back, we can talk more about that.
Yeah, and Steve, when we come back from this break, I want to ask you a final question about Empire Beneath the Ice, but then I want to talk to you about your new documentary. We did several broadcast television programs. People can watch those online now. And I want to talk to you about getting you back up here to Missouri to do some more programs on the next, part 2
Tom.
in that series, also Empires Beneath the Ice. But I want to ask you about the first documentary that just came out. It's brand new. I want people to know about it.
We will get to that on the other side. Folks, you're listening to the Hagman and Hagman Report with Tom Horn and Steve Quayle on Global Star Radio Network. We'll be right back.
Just what kind of thriller predicts the future? In 3 days in the belly of the beast, Daniel Holdings wrote about the God particle before CERN actually discovered the God particle. In As the Darkness Falls, Daniel wrote about an Islamist terrorist confederacy that rose up out of Syria and declared a caliphate 3 years before ISIS was ever heard of. In his newest novel, Between the Veil, Daniel talks about a space between dimensions where supernatural beings can walk. He says that these novels are a warning from the Creator to his creation. Will war come to America? Will the world's economies collapse? Are we looking at increased earthquakes and volcanic activity? Will the United States fall into civil war? You can find all of Daniel's work at his website, danielholdings.com. That's danielholdings.com. All of these things and more are talked about in Daniel's books. To find out what's coming next, go to danielholdings.com.
Hi, it's Lynn Oz, and believe it or not, there is just a little something that you can do to help change the lives of some of our veterans in need. I will be joining L.A. Marzulli, Doug and Joe Hagman, John B. Wells, Coach Dave Daubenmire, Dr. Ted Brower, Greg Jackson, Reverend Flip Benham, and Benjamin Baruch this March 18th through 20th, 2016 in Dallas, Texas for the Hear the Watchman Conference Revival and Worship event. We want to bring as many veterans in need as possible to the event so they can receive the blessings of Jesus Christ and be part of this incredible event. Join all of us and the team at American Survival Wholesale to make this happen by visiting www.hearthewatchmen.com and donating a little something, or by clicking on the American Wholesale logo and purchasing their Veterans Day special. Please help us remember those who gave so freely in defense of our freedom and now need our help. Again, visit www.hearthewatchmen.com today. Also, be sure and visit our sponsors, American Survival Wholesale. Their website is AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com. I look forward to seeing all of you at the conference and meeting you in person. Don't forget to spread the word and share the website www.hearthewatchmen.com with everyone you can, so everyone can participate in the Hear the Watchman Conference Revival and Worship event in March of 2016.
You are listening to the Hagman and Hagman Report on the Global Star Radio Network. Stay tuned. Doug and Joe will be right back. Listening to the Hagman and Hagman Report on the Global Star Radio Network. Stay tuned. Doug and Joe will return shortly. You're listening to the Hagman and Hagman Report on the Global Star Radio Network. Stay tuned. Doug and Joe will return shortly. You are listening to the Hagman and Hagman Report on the Global Star Radio Network. Stay tuned.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to our third and final hour on this Tuesday, November 17th edition of the Hagman and Hagman Report. We're blessed tonight to be joined by Steve Quayle from stevequayle.com and Mr. Tom Horn, prolific author, speaker, and so much more. He brings so much to the table, and we do and have fantastic shows when these two are on together. But first,
we could go for 6 hours, and we've been getting emails from our contact us page at Hagman and Hagman. Can you go for 6 hours? And unfortunately, we can't, but certainly we could. Before we get back to Mr. Horn and Mr. Quayle, I just want to mention that folks, how many people are on antidepressants out there? Let me see a show of hands. Yeah, that's all right. You can raise them. Okay. We know so many people are suffering from PTSD. We know people are on pharmaceuticals for depression or anxiety. Here's what I found. By the way, while you're shopping at nuts.com, scoot on over to wholetoneslive.com. Now that's wholetone, tones, plural, live.com, wholetoneslive.com, wholetoneslive.com. Scoot on over to there and check this out, because we talk about harmonics. Steve Quayle talks about harmonics. Tom Horn, others talk about harmonics in our lives, about the music. You know, that head-banging, heavy metal music that really makes your ears bleed? Well, there's an antidote for PTSD, and certainly what I believe is diametrically opposite to that, and that's wholetoneslive.com. There, they've got music that really the artist there digs into the King David instrumentals. Remember King David. David soon soothed King Saul's depression with music. Well, the same music. And I'm not talking New Age. I'm talking biblically Christian sound music at wholetoneslive.com. I've talked to a couple of people, friends of mine, who have downloaded the music as well. And I'll tell you something. One plays it in the nursery of his son. So wholetoneslive.com. You won't be sorry. And again, this is not New Age. This is certainly biblical based, or at least referenced in the Bible. So wholetoneslive.com. Thank you for allowing me to go through that as well. Visit our partners in this radio endeavor, AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com, and also Survival401k.com. Steve, kicking it back to you, sir.
Well, I think, it's critical that given the war that's coming on the nutritional field, one of the things I want to recommend, I have a great sponsor, and this is for the people's sake. Coco Mojo has been put out by Inner Health, and it's amazing because you'll want to get some of this too, Tom. It's got coconut. It's infused with coconut and herbs that support the immune system. And what's interesting about coconut has lauric and caprylic acid, and those are absolutely a necessity for building your immune system. And I really love this stuff. And Inner Health has got some amazing food products. So if you go on my site, stevequayle.com, because today what prompted me to bring up probably one of my longest sponsors is the fact that we're seeing the war getting ready to be made, Doug, against any kind of foods that will provide nutritional support. Obviously, in a very dangerous situation that we're now facing throughout the world, it's critical that people can maintain optimum health as long as they can. So, I'm just saying that one of my favorite things is Coco Mojo, and the reason Coco Mojo's on my radar screen is because the first thing that's going to happen as the Baltic Dry Index collapses further is a lot of the imports that used to come into this country are going to be stopped. So for those of you who are chocolate lovers and those of you who understand the benefits of coconut milk powder, I would recommend you go to EnerHealth, and those guys are gracious enough to have a lot of specials for my customers, and it's 866-762-9238, 866-762-9238, or they can go on my page. See, the war is on us, and the war is on us at a genetic level. The war is on us in every form, every realm, and even in realms we're not aware of yet. The enemy and the evil one are planning to make war on us and against us in that realm. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're at the point now where what Tom and I are talking about is no longer future. And, Tom, you had a couple questions, and I'll just yield you because, again, in our series, True Legend, the series, you've got to watch the first one to understand. I said this on Coast to Coast, and very few people caught it. Maybe it's safer to say very few people care. Imagine this. Imagine the fallen angels, knowing that the flood would come, wrote their whole history, if you will, in an arcane form, but almost a supernatural level of understanding through literal cuts, if you will, hieroglyphs, more correctly, geoglyphs, into the earth in a vertical manner. And then they used almost a checkerboard form of mathematics to position all stellar positions, etc. And imagine that's on the cusp of being deciphered. Now, to my knowledge, it may be deciphered, but reading from the Harvard and all the different people that are trying to do it, is that not mind-blowing? If it basically said, hi, we're here, here's what we did, here's where we're coming back, here's a rebellion against God. I don't think, the same people that you've talked to looking for an alien savior would be too happy about that.
Yeah, here's what's interesting is that, as you guys know, I've been on the road a lot, actually, this year, and almost permanently the last 2 months. Steve, it's been almost impossible for you to get a hold of me. Joe and Doug, almost impossible to get a hold of me. I've been on the road working on this documentary and finally getting back right now. But what's interesting is that, again, the stuff that Joe and Doug Hagmann have been doing, and even some of the people that they're promoting now. Nuts. I'm trying to think of the name of it. Is it Nuts.com?
Nuts.com.
Nuts.com.
Yeah. So you've got these natural snacks. Steve now talking about Coco Mojo. These natural products. And by the way, Steve, just so you know, and so that Coco Mojo knows, I had learned about the benefits of what's the Coco Mojo product? Coconut.
Well, the EnerHealth is one of the products, but yep, coconut.
Yeah, I have been learning about that, and so as I'm on the road, guess what? I'm snacking on. I'm snacking on nuts. I'm snacking on coconut. I'm trying to be a good boy, right? I'm trying to do all the right things. Why? Because we are in a period in time where we are in a genetic Armageddon. The foods that we eat, the products that we consume. I mean, and I am traveling, and I'm driving down the road, and there's no way in the world I'm going to pull into these fast food restaurants. I mean, seriously, the more I learn, the more these things look like biological laboratories.
I call them, Tom, early death diners.
Yeah, my gosh, right? So I would, if Tom Horn means anything to anybody out there, I would really, throw my vote for Nuts.com, Coco Mojo. Is it CocoMojo.com?
No, it's EnerHealth. It's, the bottom line is this is one of the best companies. It's EnerHealthBotanicals.com. But the easiest way is just go to my website. It's right up on top of my headlines.
Yeah, so just go to SteveQuell.com and you'll see it there. But the point is, you need to take control of the food that you are eating, what you are putting in your body. It's not like in the days of old. It's not like back in the old times when my grandparents survived, the grapes of wrath, right? And the worst thing back then you would have is a sugar tit, and you would, put sugar inside of a cloth and you'd suck through it because you couldn't even afford to buy candy. But that was then. This is now. And the stuff that is being pumped into the fast food companies and most of the restaurants, the foods that we're eating, they are literally a biological hazard. And so, so Hagman and Hagman, SteveQuayle.com, learn the kind of good products that you can eat. Believe me, I know, because I'm regaining all of my health. I've cured my own diabetes. I've lost scores of pounds of weight. I've done all of it naturally, just naturally, just eating good products, and I'm very excited about it. Now, Steve, a couple of things real quick. Empire Beneath the Eye, book's coming out in December. I'm right now putting in my plug. I want you to come on Skywatch TV. I want to be the first, if possible, person to interview you on this new book. If it's possible, I'm just putting in my plug. I'm telling you, as your old friend here.
Well, Tom, I'd be glad to, but I think I'll be on Coast to Coast the first week in, December, as they got to me
I'm talking
first.
about television now.
Yeah, no, radio them. There's, again, ladies and gentlemen, what's interesting about True Legends, here's the deal. You can go on my website and download it. And we've lowered the price to rent, not download it, to rent it. You can rent it for $7. You can buy the whole DVD for $24.95. But here's the thing. As you know, it's becoming more and more difficult as nations close down anything that has to do with antiquity. For instance, when my crew was in Bolivia, they literally were worried about ending up in a South American prison hellhole. But it was interesting, Tom, because the Bolivian government had just announced a whole new, if you will, underground array of pyramids. Now, again, it's not what you see on top of the surface where these ancient sites are. It's what's underneath them. So the reason we started in Peru was because of Lake Titicaca being obviously the highest freshwater lake in the world of size. And the other thing that was interesting is all of the giant findings and origins seem to originate in Peru.
Well, now, Steve, let's make sure people understand what we're talking about here. We're talking about Gen 6 Productions, which is the company you own. You produce the documentary film. It's the very first one. It's a brand new film. It's the first in a series of films you're going to produce. Now, tell me the name of the documentary and now how people can get
Okay, yeah, I'm excited. I'm way ahead of myself here. It's True Legends, a documentary film series. The first one is called Technology of the Fallen. And what we're doing there is showing there's a difference, Tom, between flood of Noah's flood architecture and the giant skeletons that were found there, and then the post-flood architecture and the giants that were found there, and when I say there, in Peru. What's interesting is that when people see these ancient alien shows or the ancient astronaut shows, they show this stuff, and what they're showing is bits and pieces. They're not showing it in the historic context of where it really is or really was, Temple of the Sun, Gateway to the Sun, all these things. Some of these things have been moved. So in the next one that's coming out, it will be basically titled something. I'm still working on the title, but the Return of the Giants and the Cover-Up. It's probably going to be a 2 DVD series because you guys out there who have been gracious to support us in buying the DVD and also in renting it are asking for more. So we've basically funded. We fund each expedition on the sale of the other ones.
Right. And I want people to know something. You came to Skywatch TV. If people want to go to skywatchtv.com, there's a couple of search engines there. There's one toward the top on the right-hand side, or pull the page all the way down. There's one on the bottom where it says search. just type in Steve Quayle or type in Quayle. And you can find these broadcast television programs that we did with Steve and with Timothy Alberino on this first documentary film. There were several things, Steve, that blew me away with this film. One was the architecture before and after the antediluvian age, and the fact that between you and Timothy, you were able to verify that some of the people there in Peru, in academia, they had actually moved some of the artifacts. That just blew me away. They moved some of the artifacts in order to confuse people about the pre- and post-antediluvian megalithic structures that were there. Talk about that.
Well, first of all, a lot of the biggest lie in history is that for instance, the Aztec, Inca, and Mayan, and obviously in Peru we're dealing with the Incan Empire, that they built the great monuments and the great temples, the great walls, like Ollantaytambo and Sacsayhuaman and some of these names that are just really difficult to pronounce. But the fact is that the Aztecs, Incans, and Mayans had no technology and even claimed in their own writings that they were built by giants, okay? Now, when I'm talking giants, I'm not talking about the archaeological or anthropological, there's another hard word for me tonight, the anthropological denial and trying to say it's Gigantopithecus. Well, for those of you familiar with anthropology, that they're just basically, they're trying to make it be the great apes. But when you look at the tools and the technology of the Aztec, Incans, and the Mayans, they had basically seashell clubs, they had some obsidian, they had rock clubs, they had basically very primitive tools, yet they had a highly developed degree of mathematics and also an understanding of their ancient history that even today is just being deciphered. The interesting thing that we were able to do, Tom, and this was a mind-blowing thing based on David Flynn, God bless him, I miss him, I wish he were on this program with us tonight, is that the Quipu, Q-U-I-P-U-S, was a system of knots of varying lengths, colors, and actual, if you will, knot patterns and knot forms, which even today, Harvard has not been able to decipher using the most advanced techniques available to them. Well, overlaying the Quipu, which we do in the True Legends series, you can actually see that they were, if you will, portable extensions of the ancient geoglyphs that can handle high mathematics. I'm talking high mathematics. And so what's fascinating is that by starting in Peru, we then are tracking all of the giants' movement, and I'm talking the giants, into Mexico, up into the Texas area, around Rockwall, Texas, going further north into the Ohio River Valley where all the mounds are. And, basically, the Adena and Hopewell were two imaginary names of people that the people that early on in the Smithsonian, they wanted to keep a lot of this stuff covered up because it didn't fit with their predetermined bias. So when you start in Peru and you move north, you also come into conflict with a lot of advanced recorded technology, and in the stelae, or if you will, the geoglyphs, and some of the rock paintings and stuff, there's absolute mind-blowing revelations of truly the technology that was available. So in the next one that's being filmed now, and that you had the chance to see the introduction, I think Doug has too, is that it's going to be, in search of the giants or the giants' return and the cover-up. As you know, what you've encountered, God, it could not have happened to your benefit to the degree it did, had the Lord not opened the door with a hierarchy of some of the brightest men in the Vatican. But what we're doing on the opposite side of the world right now than what you guys were doing is basically encountering people that have some of the most mind-boggling stories to tell about what they have unearthed and the teams that come in and take the artifacts. For the record, there's a
story floating around the internet about Australia, the giants being found. That guy doesn't exist. That was a false story planted to try and throw us off. But what's becoming more and more obvious to me is that the actual live giants that are being spotted around the world and that are being absolutely referenced, for instance, another Iraqi war vet who's a friend of mine sent me an email on going in, well, I won't talk about zombies tonight, but a zombie village in Iraq, and absolutely running into a special operations teams years later after the infamous pilot had flown the dead giant out of Bagram Air Force Base. He ran into a group of guys that were talking about, unfortunately, American soldiers that had their heads ripped off with giant fingerprints on the chest and contusions and everything. So it's coming to pass, and as it's coming to pass, it being that the giants are returning, this is why it's critical. It's got to be understood by people that the fallen angels are reintroducing themselves into the human genome, that they are bringing back their children. They want their children back. Is it not a fair statement, Tom? You know the Book of Enoch and the Book of Giants. The giants were lamenting the death of their children, were they not?
Yeah, well, it's not just the Book of Enoch. I mean, if you read the Septuagint, you pick this up, the Book of Isaiah talks about the return of the giants. The book of Jubilees, the ancient religious work that's considered inspired, actually, scripture by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. All of those ancient texts tell us that the day is coming in which these giants are going to return. That's the most extraordinary thing, right? It's a prophecy, and it's actually in many of the Orthodox Bibles. This is an end times prophecy. Now, one of the other things that blew me away about your first documentary. So you have the first documentary. You put out so much stuff; it's hard to keep up with, Steve. Your first documentary, True Legends, is available now. The second one is in production, and you have a book coming out at the first of the year. So I'm going to have a hard time keeping up with all this, but we have totally got to get you back to Skywatch Television. By the way, we're going on the church channel pretty soon, but we're already on CTN. So I love having you on the program. Want to have you on as often as we can.
Well, thank you. And again, let me just say this too. True Legends, the documentary film series, it's imperative that people understand the first one because we build off of the first one, and it's available for download on my website on the right-hand side, for $7. It came out. We want everybody to see it. Those of you who want to buy it and purchase it, it's available through Skywatch TV, my website, and we have a special going on at Skywatch with the True Legends, both the DVD and the book. But here's the thing. It's fascinating to me that now we're dealing with all of the promises of so many of the scriptures of antiquity. Is it in Jubilees where it says that your women will give birth to monsters? Or is that in Esdras?
Let's see, the Book of Jubilees. Jubilees specifically describes all of the fallen angels, and what it says is that the Lord spoke to those. Now, keep in mind, this is scripture according to several Orthodox versions of the church, and it actually it not only describes who the fallen angels were, it also provides a kind of frightening prophetic scenario in that it says that the spirits of the Nephilim are on earth, and in the last days they'll be manifested. A tenth of the demons will be manifested in flesh in order to exercise the God's authority around wrath to corrupt, lead astray before his judgment. What I would say to people is go to Jubilees and read chapter 10, specifically like verses 5 through 10 or 12.
Tom, if I can interject, I'm sorry. 2 Esdras 5 verse 8 references the women giving birth to monsters. I just, for those people who are specifically looking for that verse, and then you go ahead. You were talking about Jubilees. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah. Well, Esdras does so the apocryphal work, and here's the interesting thing: the apocryphal works were expunged from the Scriptures by the Catholic Church, and they had a series around which, the Council of Trent, all of that, they determined what would be considered to be Scripture and not considered to be Scripture. And for the longest time, there were versions of the Catholic Bible that included the apocryphal work. So we're talking about, like 10, 12, 14, whatever it is, books, everything from 1st and 2nd Maccabees to Enoch and Jubilees and whatever. Now, some of the Orthodox churches, after the expulsion of those scriptures from text, went ahead and kept them in their Bibles. And so there are German Orthodox churches, there are other Orthodox churches. Some of them kept the Book of Enoch, some of them kept the Book of Jubilees, some of them kept both. But these books are interesting, even if you don't accept them as Scripture. They're interesting in that their antiquity is validated. And most of them actually have a lot to say about Genesis chapter 6. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God, they provide the storyline behind what was going on in ancient times. So even if you don't accept them as Scripture, they provide a good historical context. Like today, Americans might pick up a book on the history of George Washington. And now, they obviously wouldn't say that this is biblical, that this is inspired by God, but they wouldn't question that the history around, the birth and the life of George Washington was probably mostly accurate. So that's the way to look at these apocryphal texts. And, of course, some organizations, some church organizations, hold them to be more than that. But let's stay on Steve. Steve, one of the other things that blew me away with the first Gen 6 production, True Legends, I had the privilege of having you and Timothy Alberino in studio. Want to be able to do that again. But we talked about this first production, and I was amazed when I heard the story of how Timothy goes to Peru, and he's in Peru, and he's looking at these pre- and post-antediluvian structures, but he finds evidence that some of these structures that were built before the flood have been intentionally moved by the government there in Peru and put up again as to confuse people who are visiting those sites as to the structures themselves. That was interesting. Timothy gets the opportunity to speak before one of the colleges there about the biblical narrative.
Right. He had presented the biblical narrative, and not one person in the class, including the professors, knew of the biblical narrative, but they all knew of the ancient aliens. And that was what was interesting, Tom. And I'm not trying to cut you off. I'm just trying to put that into perspective. That was a door that the Lord opened up. And, in the gateway to the sun, that's what was moved. And that is a known Stargate, okay? Now, look, I don't know how you make it work now or whatever, but they claim it's 1,500 years old. It's far older than that. We're talking prehistoric. When I say prehistoric, we're talking history. We're talking before the flood of Noah, for sure. And so the gate of the sun at Tiwanaku was moved, and what's fascinating is you can see instantly the difference between that which was pre-flood architecture and that which was post. Even the actual material that was quarried was different in the pre-flood building period versus the post-flood building period. So, isn't it interesting that which is moved first and foremost? Now, one thing that can be derived, too, from that the temple or the gate of the sun is absolutely in the perimeter or the periphery, close periphery of the Bolivian border in which the pyramidal system was located. And by the way, it's totally surrounded by the military. Somebody once said, how do you know when something's significant? I said, when it's totally surrounded by the military. Because, again, we're just hearing, too, are we not? And this has everything to do with Bolivia, Tiwanaku, that they're now using a new form of cosmic scanning of the pyramids of Giza and the Great Pyramids on the plateau there, but they're finding different anomalies. And what's more interesting than just a new burial chamber possibly is an energy source that has heretofore not been, defined. So when you're talking about energy sources of the ancients, they were absolutely in a different realm. And so that's why it's critical that people understand the parallel investigations that you're doing, I'm doing. You're in the desert Southwest. You're at Mount Graham. Is it the second holiest site in Native American, or one of the top three? Yeah.
And the thing there was in the Four Corners area when we were doing that investigation, we learned that there are ongoing university-level investigations. And guess what? They're finding the remains of giant beings, what they call giant anasazi, between 7 and 8 feet tall. They've got 6 fingers, 6 toes, lion-like teeth. So we're talking about a phenomenon that exists around the world. But let's get back to the Gen 6 production. There were a couple of things, and I really hope people will go to skywatchtv.com, go to the search box, type in quail. Just type in quail, Quayle, and you'll find all the programs that we did with Steve and Timothy, where you can learn about the Gen 6 Productions DVD, or you can just go to stevequayle.com, learn about it there. There were a couple of things, Steve, that really blew me away. One of them had to do, you guys brought a helmet and a sword, and the sword was, 42 inches long?
42 inches long, and we brought that. It was a conquistador's sword. What's called, the one we brought to you was a basket hilt rapier, and it's one of the most interesting swords because that's the one that one of the early, if you will, conquistadors, when they found a skeleton, that the skeleton from the bottom of the chin to the top of the head was 6 feet tall, the eyes were about 24, but from the eye socket, the sword went into the eye socket and barely reached the back, barely touched the back of the skull.
Yeah, so folks, so imagine this. This is not Steve Quayle and Timothy Alvarino making this stuff up. They go to Peru. They get invited to talk to the people that run the national libraries for Peru, who have these artifacts that remain from the Mexican Wars, the conquistadors, all that. And here are these are documents. These are historical documents that are in the National Library in Peru, where the conquistadors. They go along, it's like a riverbank, right, Steve? And along this riverbank, here is a giant, a dead giant. It's laying there. They go up and they take their sword, which is 42 inches long, and they put it through the eye socket. It barely reaches to the back of this giant's skull. Now, this is in the National Historical Libraries. It's a historical record, and so that would have made this giant, 30 feet tall, 32 feet tall, Steve?
Actually 36 feet tall, and that seems to have been the norm prior to the flood. After that, the giants basically were halved.
Yeah, and now, another thing that really struck me when interviewing you guys on this documentary and all the research that you're doing there, I can't hardly wait to get to the second film, but the first film, people have got to see it in order to understand the second one. The other thing that really stood out to me, and maybe because of the research that Chris Putnam and I were doing, was Timothy telling us about everywhere he went in Peru, he was shadowed by agents of the Vatican. Now, tell me about that.
Well, it's fascinating because, we keep in pretty good contact, and the situation is that you'd swear it was a scene of the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Whenever they would go any place, there would always be the, if you will, the one or two people. It didn't matter if they were in the hotel or the hostels or wherever, even at the restaurants. They started to begin to pick up. Fortunately, I've got a couple of pretty smart guys, thank the Lord, and they're running their cameras. Nice thing about digital still cameras is you can run movie footage. So what was fascinating, though, it's the same they found in Sardinia the first time, Tom. They were always and the people they interviewed in Sardinia, here's what's interesting. The people they interviewed in Sardinia, the people they interviewed in Peru and in Bolivia, all would talk as if they were afraid of having to deal with the Vatican. When they went into Cusco, downtown Cusco, they were followed too. And so the point is that somebody's keeping a real watchful eye on these guys, and it's fascinating to me that the giants, if you want to know the topic that brings the wrath of the archaeological, the antiquities, and everybody on denial on steroids, it's this very subject matter, and it basically is the giants. I want to share something else. Before Tim left, he sent me an email from one of our listeners, and the listener basically was going up to a town up in the highlands of the cloud people in Peru called Ocay. And the guy was kind of, blowing it off and initially when he was going to go there, because Tim had told the story about people finding cattle, live cattle, literally up in trees, stuck at the 30-foot level.
Yeah.
And this guy literally went down there, and I think he just checked in about a week ago, but he sent Tim an email, and I can't find it right now on my email register because I'd like to read it, but basically he said this: from the time I entered up into the cloud forest, I was followed by something. I could see the shadows on the entities. He said, I've never been so scared in my life. The bottom line is, he said, Tim, what you said about the supernatural nature of this area, I went up as a skeptic. I came down as one of the most fearful and how do I say this, upset people that you've ever met because it was that scary. It was that supernatural. It was that out of the world. So what I believe is happening in a lot of these areas, Tom, they're becoming supercharged once again. I can't tell the mechanism. I don't know that. But it seems like where there was an evil presence, it's now manifesting. Where there were gates, people are saying they've been dormant. They're now coming alive. And in True Legends, you'll see one of the most famous stargates known to exist in South America, in Peru, and it's called Amara Muru. And it's probably one of the most interesting things because when they were there, this is fascinating. You really picked up on this. They had the shamans, if you will, call them whatever, the men there, they were trying to open the gate, and they were using sound. They were using almost like, if you will, Buddhist bells and metal cups and everything. But when Tim and the crew went there, they had a localized storm over them, no place else, that just hailed tremendously, a lot of lightning, a lot of storm, and even the locals could not figure out what was going on. My opinion is obviously with the weather control and everything else, somebody is watching them on a satellite. Now, people don't believe that exists, but I'm telling you, when you're dealing with core reality, and that's what we're talking about, that's what you are talking about, True Legends, the series, legends are not lies. That's the thing we have been told. And here's something that people need to understand. Back in 1986, there was a G.I. Joe cartoon called Arise, and a guy by the name of Jason sent this to me. Now, I remember watching G.I. Joe cartoons, and Cobra and all that stuff, but what was fascinating, in 1986, the evil man in that was called Serpentor.
And Serpentor was a hybrid that they had taken the DNA from some of the most evil men in history, obviously extracted it and combined it to produce this man who had the best of all evil, if you can say it, or the worst of all evil. And that was the lead character in a whole, I think, 6-episode series. So fast forward. I'm talking to a general a couple years ago, and he's telling me, he said, are you aware that there's a group that's literally been searching high and low for the DNA of everyone from Genghis Khan to Attila the Hun to you name it? And I said, no, I wasn't, but thanks for that, because that's the stuff I'm interested in. And so here's what people have got to understand. When someone evil died, their spirit, obviously, if they're a human, if they knew God, they go to heaven. If they don't, they go to hell. But for those who are hybrids, that spirit, that disembodied spirit of any of the Rephaim, which are the giants, that's what became the demons on the earth. It says that specifically in the book of Giants and the book of Enoch. The point being is that there are entities, Tom, looking for, if you will, the DNA to reanimate their offspring and bring them back into the bodies that were destroyed when God destroyed the giants with the flood. Now, here's what's even...
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
I saw the exclusive screener to your new documentary film that's being worked on right now. And I have to tell you, Steve, I couldn't help it. When I was watching that not the documentary, the screener, and the public hasn't seen it, it's Hollywood produced. It's extraordinary. But when I'm watching it, I'm thinking of Daniel chapter 2, right? This famous story, Nebuchadnezzar's vision, the great image with its head of gold and breast of silver and thighs of brass and legs of iron and feet of iron and clay. Why? Because you depict, I can't give away what it is you depict, but it has to do with the reanimation of something that once was. And what I find interesting is that, prophetically speaking, the succeeding empires that are depicted in Nebuchadnezzar's vision, these all begin with Babylon, and they end with a revival of the return in the end times of the spirit of these former world empires. What once was will be again. Babylon, it begins with Nimrod, right? He who began to be. That's what Genesis says about him. He began to be. If you read that in the Septuagint, Old Testament, it says he began to be a giant. So if that's how Babylon and the succeeding empires began, and the final world empire is going to incorporate that original evil empire, then Daniel might be telling us that at the end of time, we're going to see what your screener that nobody has seen yet depicts, the revival of something that once was. I don't know how much here I can give away. I'm talking about Nebuchadnezzar's dream that tells us what the final world events are going to be, and it includes genetics and despotic rulers of the end time. Remember, Daniel says they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. That's what Daniel says in Daniel chapter 2. He doesn't say who they are. He just simply says they are going to mingle themselves with the seed of men. This is a personal pronoun. Who in the heck are they that are going to mingle themselves with the seed of men? It's troubling. But I think that people need to see the first documentary. They need to see Timothy Alberino going into these areas. And by the way, let me tell you that I appreciate how much you gave credit to David Flynn. He was a friend of mine. He was a friend of yours. A decade ago, he discovers, I think, important information related to the legend of the Watchers. He's using satellite technology. We don't have time to go into all of his discoveries. We're giving his book away with your documentary at Skywatch TV. You started there, but it really deals with how all around the world there are really old, mysterious constructions that defy explanation unless you put them into a biblical narrative, right?
Absolutely, and again, I will make this statement. I know one of the presidential candidates, Ben Carson, believes that the Hebrews built the big Great Pyramid. It just basically, no way. I know that there are people that want to go with a standard timeline of there was nothing prior to the creation of Adam and Eve in the way of architecture. That's just simply not true. The rebellion that took place on Earth and is demonstrated throughout the solar system. Ladies and gentlemen, please go to my website, stevequayle.com. Go over on the right-hand side and please rent the DVD, because once the new one comes out, the only way to get the first one will be to buy, purchasing. And if you want to build a collection of these, I got to tell you, it is absolutely, in my opinion, pivotal. This is the Rosetta Stone to history. Tom Horn and I aren't on basically going out into a world, coming up with a whole new, our favorite theme and trying to put it out there. It is the time. This has been hidden from the eyes of the average person, and God said his people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. And what we're finding out, Tom, is the very same monsters, the very same, quote, descriptions of aliens, the very same descriptions of craft. Guess what? That's all present through the Incan, Aztec, and Mayan myths, okay? It's fascinating to me that people can't any longer put two and two together, yet they'll suspend any type of logic, and they'll go to all the stuff that's going on in the theaters. And if you notice, ladies and gentlemen, everything in the theaters is turning to even more and more blood and cannibalism and perversion. And I'm not saying anybody should go to theaters, but what I'm saying is this, is that the truth is the way to deal with fear. Again, for those of you that don't understand why this is relevant, Jesus made it clear that you would know the time that of his return, his second coming, and of the final battles in history, when the days arrive, when the day would arrive, where that except those days were shortened, there'd be no flesh left alive. What Tom Horn is telling you in his DVD, Inhuman, what we're telling you in True Legend is that the very entities that hate humanity, that are energized by the devil, that are under his control, authority, and command, are coming back, and they are working overtime to destroy every last man, woman, and child. That's biblical. Somebody once said, well, where's your faith, Quayle? My faith is in the living God, and my faith is this, trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. I've been called to this. Tom Horn, you've been called to this. We both had different ideas of how our lives would play out. Boy, were we both mistaken, were we not?
Right. Hey, by the way, I read an article, and this from a science journal just this week, on a giant 8-foot-tall skeletons. But guess what? They were uncovered in Ecuador. And they actually support the Genesis 6 documentary, your Genesis 6 documentary findings. And these 8-foot-tall giants have been sent in now for study inside
genetic testing on the, they're doing it the right way. They're keeping the place where they've sent it to hidden, and they're keeping their findings close. Because let me share this. This is core reality. Those of you in the intelligence community will know what that means. And Tom, at this point, God, the Scripture says, surely the Lord God will do nothing except he reveals his secrets to his servants, the prophets. Neither you or I claim to be prophets, but he's going to reveal the secrets, the things that have been hidden. And I think the most mind-blowing thing is this. The same devil that demanded blood sacrifice and cannibalism in the Aztec, Incan, Mayan Empire. And by the way, all the giants pretty much were cannibals. There were no vegans, okay, that I've been able to find. And the point is that this is what is fascinating to me. Our atmosphere is changing. Even our gravitational field is changing. And when people say, well, you can't have people that size, they forget that we're talking about something that was half human and half fallen angel, the giants, the Rephaim. And what's happening is this, and this is why True Legends is so critical. Ladies and gentlemen, I have said this, I stand by this statement. Genesis 6 is the Rosetta Stone for understanding all of history. What Tom and Chris are bringing separate and independent to you is the bottom line is how it plays out. What myself and Timothy and the True Legends crew are bringing to you is how it all began and how it is playing out. In essence, we're laying the ground, we're going back in history, but we're also showing you that there's enough evidence that some of these things are alive now, and if they're alive now, you can say, well, I don't want to do, I've seen every mocking post, not every, but I've seen a lot of them out there. The problem is, Tom, is that people won't believe what they see, they won't believe what Jesus says, and they won't absolutely apply themselves. This is not for, our version of War of the Worlds, okay? This is War of the Dimensions. And you talked about Babylon. We are talking about something beyond Gabriel's ladder. We're talking about a trinary ladder of a third strand of DNA, which I wrote, in my book, Xenogenesis, something added into the human genome. And as you go about inhuman, here is the point. People have got to quit looking at some of these entities they see on television and assuming they're human. I'm on record as saying they're not. What you see are a lot of replacements. Somebody says, well, how come this guy looks three different ways, different times, and one's got a scar on his head? In the world of genetic engineering and in the world of cloning, the real entity is called the actual. That which is duplicated is called the dupe. There are some people, or if you will, that are duplicated. The question is, Tom, are some of these people giving themselves over to such abject demon possession that the real human no longer exists? It is my statement that is happening now, and that is what people are seeing.
Yeah. By the way, thank you, Steve, Joe, Doug, for having us on the program tonight. If people want the Inhuman giveaway, the $300 in products giveaway, go to skywatchtv.com. They need to also go to stevequayle.com to either rent or purchase the new documentary from Gen 6 Productions, and then keep an eye out for the second edition of that documentary project and the new book from Steve Quayle. These are all, by the way, first come, first served, limited supply while supplies last. So if you're going to do it, you got to do it now.
Tom, thank you. Get some rest, and thank you for your gracious gift of time, both of you.
Yeah, fantastic show.
You're welcome, Doug.
But I just want to say this, Steve. Rosetta Stone of the past, present, and future. This is exactly what we're seeing. The relevance, it's 100% relevant because there is nothing new under the sun, is there?
Right. Nothing at all.
All right.
Folks, till tomorrow, Paul McGuire will be our guest. He will be coming on. I'm not sure. I think he has a prayer meeting coming up on the 19th. On the 19th. We're going to be having information about the prayer meeting on our website, hagmanandhagman.com, but please make sure you put it in your calendar for Thursday. Yeah, and for the rest of the week, but we have Paul McGuire Wednesday. I know Ted Broer is coming on Friday.
Morgellons disease or Morgellons, however you want to pronounce it. That's very specific, topic specific.
And then is Paul Hegstrom on Thursday?
Steve Quayle and Paul Hegstrom. Again, Steve Quayle coming back again on Thursday with Paul Hegstrom, Dr. Paul Hegstrom.
That's 2 weeks in a row with Steve, and all three now episodes have been fantastic. And Paul Hegstrom has been a guest on our show previously.
Life Skills International. Yep.
It's been a while, and he is a tremendous guest. I can't wait to pick his brain. and it should be a great show as always. We want to thank each and every one of you for tuning in, whether you watch live or you listen live or by archive. We want to thank Eric and JD and Global Star Radio Network and Todd over there working hard. And God bless each and every one of you. Until tomorrow with Paul McGuire, stay safe, God bless, and have a good evening.
Amen. Yeah. And one last thing, again, tomorrow night, Paul McGuire, don't miss that. Going to be talking a lot about, well, certain things that we've talked about. I don't want to give too much away.
How do you know? I haven't decided what we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
No, it should be a great show.
I spoke with Paul for quite a while yesterday. Well, just tune in tomorrow, folks.
Reporting on what the mainstream media won't, you're listening to the Hagman and Hagman Report on the Global Star Radio Network.